IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We're live here on a Friday. Typically, that'd be recruiting hour time, but we had to flip the recruiting hour show, and the Monday mailbag now is on Friday. So it's free for all mailbag day. You can throw as many questions in the chat as you would please. Just make sure you put an MB or a mailbag in front of them so that we can distinguish in the chat what is a mailbag question, what is general chatter. I am fired up today. Ryan Roberts, joined with Brian Driscoll, of course, the publisher here at IrishBreakdown.com, because the 2024 Hall of Fame class for the NFL was announced. We have 2025 recruits setting up official visits. We have Joel Embiid getting injured for the 17th time in his 76er career. I'm fired up, man. A lot of sports. Brian, excited to be back, man. A lot of great questions I know that we had even before the show began. This feels like it's going to be a great show.
I think so. It's going to be fun. We were going to get started. I mean, Ryan and I are sitting here. We've been on the show for 15 minutes, ready to get started right at 1:03. And then I made the mistake of asking him a question about the NFL Hall of Fame. And that just kind of got us rocking and rolling. So, it's perfect, Ryan, because it does lead into what our first question is going to be. But, man, it's February. There's a lot going on, man. A lot of recruiting stuff going on. A lot of college football news going on. Bill O'Brien set to become the new head coach at Boston College. And it's interesting. I'm really curious to see what Ohio State does, because this could end up being a positive for them depending on who they replace them with. And,
Sure.
Because I'm not a very big Bill O'Brien fan, and I didn't love that hire. So we'll see what they do. But very interesting situation. Obviously, how Washington's name was thrown into that. Now the rumors that I'm hearing and some people that I've talked to around the BC program, or at least to cover the BC program, talking about how there may be a desire to bring in Al Washington still as the D coordinator. We'll see how that goes. So just a whole lot going on, man. Whole lot to discuss, but we got a super chat from Tyler Evans to get us started off with, Ryan. Or what were you going to say? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, because obviously Coach Washington had spent some time with the Boston College program when he was a young defensive line coach. He was working with the Harold Landrys and those types of guys.
And he played there.
At Boston College.
Yeah, he played at Boston College as well. So
yeah,
he's very familiar with that program. Very familiar with that program. And if you're the leadership at Boston College, it would make sense if you can try to somehow convince Bill O'Brien to bring him in, because they thought enough of Al Washington to interview for the head coaching job. You have to be smart enough to think that Bill O'Brien may not be here that long. He doesn't exactly have a track record of being at places for long periods of time. And he is someone who is a desired. If he does well at BC, there's not a, it's not a given that some NFL team's not going to come calling for him for some reason. I don't get it, but he seems to be a guy that a lot of other people think very, very highly of. So Washington comes in for a few years. He's your D coordinator, and maybe you have your natural replacement as your head coach when Bill O'Brien leaves, if Bill O'Brien leaves. So who knows? We'll see how all that goes. But as of right now, he's still the defensive line coach at Notre Dame. Chris O'Leary is still the safeties coach, and so everybody can just take a deep breath and let's have fun and enjoy this Friday mailbag. But we're going to get it kicked off, Ryan, with Tyler Evans getting us started with a super chat.
Tyler, thank you so much. And you are continuing a conversation that not only me and Brian have had before the show started, but also a battle that I'm going to on Twitter as well, because I'm very passionate about the NFL Hall of Fame. For people that don't know, 2024 NFL Hall of Fame class, what do you think? And for people that have not seen it, the 2024 Hall of Fame class I have it in front of me is former Carolina Panther, Chicago Bear defensive end Julius Peppers, former Chicago Bear returner, kick and punt returner Devin Hester, also played a little wide receiver and corner during his career. Dwight Freeney, the great pass rusher from the Indianapolis Colts. Andre Johnson, Houston Texans wide receiver. Patrick Willis, linebacker from the San Francisco 49ers. Steve McMichael, Mongo, who was a great defensive tackle for the Chicago Bears in the 1980s during that really great stretch of defensive football. And then Randy Gradishar, who was a very good linebacker back in the day for the Denver Broncos as well.
Yeah, man. You left out part of Steve McMichael's resume, Ryan. He was also part of the Four Horsemen for a while in the WCW.
My apologies. So, what he was better known for. What he was better known for. Yes.
Randy Gradishar. Forget all that. He's part of the Four Horsemen, baby. Look, obviously, Ryan, overall thoughts that you have about the class. It's I'll just say this. I'm glad that my first immediate takeaway was I'm glad Randy Gradishar is finally getting his Hall of Fame due. He was a great player on a defense that was pretty good for a period of time and was the driving force behind the Broncos getting to a Super Bowl even before the John Elway era. That Orange Crush defense led them to a Super Bowl with Craig Morton at quarterback. So
Yep.
Yeah, that was good to see getting in as part of that. He was part of what the senior, him and McMichael were part of that
Senior
senior.
committee.
Right,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep.
So I'll let
I
you
mean,
kick it off, Ryan.
I mean, like, look, guys, like of the we have 7 guys that made the Hall of Fame this year. I would say just first and foremost, I think it's a very good class because there are some years where a guy might get in where I'm just like, was he really a Hall of Famer though? Was he really to that level? I don't think there's a player on this list that I would say doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, right? I think that there's a conversation about a couple people that maybe didn't get into Hall of Fame and maybe a couple of these players that maybe got in a little too quickly comparative to like maybe a first ballot of what typically should be in. But overall, I have no issue with the players that got in the simple nature of did they deserve to be in the NFL Hall of Fame? I'm good with that. The Pro Football Hall of Fame, I should say. I'm completely fine with it. It's just more my battle comes to there's a couple guys that were left off this list where I'm just like, man, I don't know why a couple of these players were prioritized more than player X, player Y. And I know we'll get into that more, obviously, but from the onset, just from the baseline level, I think it's a very good class, and I think that the players that got in did deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, just in general, in a vacuum, if that makes sense.
My 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 thought was, Ryan, I actually there was one guy that I did kind of scratch my head a little bit about why he got in, and I'll be honest, looking at the numbers, it makes more sense. But I never watched Andre Johnson play and felt at any time that's a Hall of Famer. That's one of the best ever do it. I think he was productive. Finished.
Yep.
He's right now 11th all time in receiving yards, but I never watched him play and felt, hey, that guy should be in. And if you're just going to go off of numbers, what I also don't understand is why Andre Johnson's getting in and Reggie Wayne is not in. I mean, Reggie
Mhm.
Wayne has more career yards. He has more career touchdowns. I don't understand. I know, games played a little bit more. That's kind of part of the deal is he was be able to stay healthy his whole career. So the fact that Reggie Wayne and Torrey Holt for me are not Hall of Famers and Andre Johnson is, I just again, part of it's numbers, right? And
Yep.
and you're 11th all time in receiving yards. I understand that. That's a heck of an accomplishment. But I just some part of it too is like I got to watch a guy and feel like that guy was great. That guy was a great
That, that,
player, and I just never
that should be
felt
the
that
end
about
all.
about
That
Andre
should be the end
Johnson.
all at the end of it, right? Like I
Yeah,
always say that I said this on the past on Hall of Fame conversations is that it should the simple question that should be definitively answered is was that guy a great football player? If the
right,
answer is yes, cool. If you have to have a slight moment of hesitation of like,
right,
yeah, then no. They weren't a great player and they probably don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, especially first ballot. Like that's
right,
kind of where the conversation comes
right.
from. So
And
yeah.
when you look at Andre Johnson, I think sometimes people obsess over too much on yards, and I get it. He's
Yep.
11th all time in yards, but he's not even in the top 50 all time in receiving touchdowns. And
Yep.
to me, like that's kind of got to be taken into account, don't you think? I mean, and so again, I
Especially for
just
a 6'3", 230-pound wide receiver. He's not a
yeah,
little
bigger
guy, you
guy.
know?
Never had 10 touchdowns in a career in a season. And when you look at Reggie Wayne again, I mean Torrey Holt and Reggie Wayne again, Reggie Wayne is a guy that ranks 29th all time in touchdowns. Torrey Holt ranks 42nd in touch. So I just never felt Andre Johnson was a excellent player. Don't get me wrong,
Yep.
excellent player. But I think I've said this before. I believe I've heard you say this before too. It's not the Hall of Fame for
No.
real, the Hall of really good players. It's supposed to be the Hall of Fame of the greats, right? And I just never felt that about Andre Johnson. And again, if you're going to bring him in, I don't understand what the justification for bringing him in when you still have Reggie Wayne sitting out there, who's been eligible
Yep.
before, I believe, Andre Johnson. So that one just doesn't make any sense to me
Yes.
because there's literally no statistical category that I could find. Maybe
Mhm.
catches, not even catches. He doesn't have him as a catches as Reggie Wayne. So I don't quite know. And he never had to split catches with Marvin Harrison the way that Reggie Wayne did.
Or Dallas Clark. Some
Right,
other
and the
guys they
same
were
thing with
playing with,
Torrey
yeah.
Holt, because Torrey Holt had to split
Yep.
catches with Isaac Bruce. He was
Yep.
always that dude for that football
Mhm.
team in with the Texans, so that would be the only one that I didn't push back on it. I have no problem. I'm usually against specialists making the Hall of Fame unless you are
Yeah.
truly there's no doubt about it, you're the greatest to ever do it, And for me, Devin Hester's number one, and there's not even a number two for me in the conversation, right? I mean, he was the greatest to ever do it. And the fact that he did some other things, he did play some receiver. He did help you beyond that is why I'm totally fine with him getting in. Yeah.
Yep.
It just taking apart who may have should or shouldn't have, or whoever else didn't. He is the best to ever do it at that position, and is a guy that changed games as a returner. And that matters.
Yeah.
To me.
The wide receiver position has been a really weird one for guys to get in, because there's always it's weird. There's been some guys that have waited really long. There's been other guys that have been first ballots where you're just kind of like, really, that guy's a first ballot? That's kind of weird. I mean, Isaac Bruce had to wait several years to get in. Wasn't it Terrell Owens had to wait a couple years because people didn't like him? And it's just like, guy had 150 touchdowns, guys. Like, come on, man. Like, at some point, you're just like, all right, great player, right? Like, come on now, let's stop that.
Yeah, and if we're gonna start putting personalities into it, then you've got murders in the Hall of, you know what I mean? Like, can we just look? It's not about Hall of first class human beings. It's Hall of Fame for what you do on the field. And I can't stand Terrell Owens. I can't. And I've never been a big Terrell Owens fan. But I don't care what your feelings are about Terrell Owens as a person, or his personality as a football player, any of those type of things. Guy was a legitimate, no doubt about it, no brainer Hall of Fame player.
Yes.
And I mean, you just elected Andre Johnson in with seven. Wasn't Andre Johnson? Wasn't this his first shot at it?
I think it was a first ballot.
You brought him in on first ballot with 72 touchdowns. Terrell Owens more than doubled that, and had more catches, and had more yards, and played in the Super Bowl. So that's
and in that Super Bowl for the Eagles, he came back from a broken ankle and had rods in his foot and had 9 catches for over 130 yards in the Super Bowl. I mean, just quickly working down the list, like Julius Peppers, cool, deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Devin Hester, I think you said it perfectly. I think that I would have argued that maybe someone should have gotten in before Devin Hester in this ballot, but like overall, best punt returner ever, best overall returner ever. You deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. No issues there. Dwight Freeney is one where I think Dwight Freeney deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, but like putting him over Jared Allen, I think is ridiculous. To be honest, I don't agree. I just don't agree with that one. I think that Jared Allen was a more productive and better player. I think fortunately for Dwight played on those Colts teams that everyone watched and everyone knew about, and he was kind of in the spotlight a little bit more, but less sacks than Jared Allen, much worse run defender than Jared Allen. Like, I don't get that one at all. Patrick Willis, abbreviated career, but he was an absolute stud. After Ray Lewis had kind of been on his downtrodden and retired, it was him and Luke Kuechly as the best inside linebacker in the NFL for the next 7-8 years, whatever that time span was. Steve McMichael probably should have been in a long time ago, and Randy Gradishar should have been in a long time ago. So overall, all these players, I think, deserve it. I think the question is, like, should it have been now for a couple guys? And maybe a couple of those guys should have been in a long time ago. But overall, I think it is a very good class for the Hall of Fame.
And with Patrick Willis, he falls into my Terrell Davis, Gale Sayers conversation. Yes, you had a shorter career than most. He didn't even play 10 years in the NFL, right? He was out at what?
I think it was
8 years, something like that.
Yeah.
But he was so dominant during that stretch that it was like, yes, that's that Sandy Koufax, Terrell Davis, Gale Sayers exception to the rule, where you were so good for, yes, it was a short period of time, but if Terrell Davis is a Hall of Famer, and I believe that he is, then Patrick Willis is a Hall of Famer. Yeah, I have no problem with that one. And again, I'm not even looking at who got left out at those positions because I'm not as versed on it, but receiver is one I've always looked at and been like, this is just weird. And it, like you said, Ryan, it's year after year after year. There's just these weird, why do you like that guy, but you're not willing to vote that guy in? Why can't Andre Johnson wait a few years like Reggie Wayne had to wait, like Isaac Bruce had to wait, like Terrell Owens had to wait? What about Andre Johnson made him a no doubt about it Hall of Famer right now when Reggie Wayne and Torrey Holt are still sitting out there? And they're not alone. Those are just the two most prominent that pop in my head as guys.
Well, and two extra thoughts is Antonio Gates should have been in this class. Antonio Gates was an all-time great at tight ends. Stats are ridiculous. Did it for a pretty good amount of time as well. I think he played for like 12, 13 years, and he was dominant. He's got over 100 career touchdowns, over 10,000 career receiving yards as a tight end. He should have been in the Hall of Fame. Brian, like him and Tony Gonzalez, they kind of started to revolutionize the tight end position for how you see it, right? Like as far as like maybe you don't have to be as much of an inline guy. Maybe you can move around a little bit. You can play in the boundary. You can play as a big slot. You can be moved around a little bit. Antonio Gates really kind of changed the position a little bit in the modern sense of what we see as a tight end. So I think he should have been
Yeah,
in, personally. I just think
I
he
I,
should have
I
been in.
would say that Terrell Davis is Shannon Sharp's the one that kind of started that, and then Gates and Gonzalez took it to another level and made it
Yep.
popular.
Yep.
Right? I mean, to your point, and you look at Antonio Gates' numbers, Ryan. And number one, longevity matters to me. I've said this before,
Yep.
and he
Yep.
played till he was 38 years old,
Yep.
and he was good until he was 34. I would
Yes,
argue
he was very good.
he
Yeah.
had 4 seasons with 10 or more touch. He had 116 touchdowns. You just brought in a wide receiver that had 72 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And Antonio Gates doesn't get in who had 116 touchdowns. I mean, it just there's just a lot of those things you look at. He had two 1,000-yard seasons as a tight end, 3 other seasons with over 900. Yeah, that's another one that I'm like, yeah, that guy. 11,000 receiving yards as a tight end.
It's
I
pretty
mean,
good, man.
that's over 100 touchdowns, 110 touchdowns, over 110 touchdowns as a tight end. Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
Yep.
That's a pretty good
Well,
one.
the one positive to a couple snubs is that next year, if we have a year where Jared Allen, Luke Kuechly is going to be on the ballot next year for the first time. So if we have Luke Kuechly, Jared Allen, Torrey Holt, your boy might have to be in Canton because that's 3 of my favorite players of all time. So might have to be out there in Canton. We'll see.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, it's not that far of a drive for you either. It's really not. It's a really
And
cool
yeah,
place to go to. It really
mhm,
is. It's if you've never been, it's a
yes,
pretty cool place to go to. It
I've been
is.
twice, but I've never been for
Yeah.
I've never been for the ceremony. So that would be a new one. That would
The
be a new one.
and they've done a lot of changes recently as well, and just kind of moving things around and redesigned it and added some new factors onto it. So I used to speak at a this was the first year I didn't do it, but I used to speak at a Canton club, Notre Dame fans and Canton clubs, and one of the guys that used to be part of that club was the one of the higher ups in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So he took me around couple tours, couple times. So that was pretty cool. Getting to see the John Elway bust and some of those others. That was a pretty cool deal.
Yep.
Pretty cool deal. Quinn Kibler with a super chat. Been a while. Hope you are all well. We are good, man. I hope you're well because we have not
Absolutely.
seen you in a while. Had a couple people show up today. Jeff DeMonk, Brian, good to see you again, my friend. Been a bit since been on. Lots of personal stuff. Glad to be listening. We're glad to have you with us, man. I know you've also had some health issues and things going on, so I'm glad you're doing well, buddy. Glad to see you with us.
We had another super chat from Pete Weber. Thank you so much, Pete. Who is on your Mount Rushmore of best movie characters of all time?
Oh
Wow,
my gosh, that is a
so
tough one.
so Mount Rushmore has 4 presidents, right? So we need 4 actors or actresses as far as the top movie
Yeah.
characters of all time.
So and he's talking
So
not actors, he's talking characters.
okay,
Boy, that's a tough one.
doesn't the acting performance go into the character though? I don't know,
Well,
man.
I mean, to me,
That's a
it's like
nuanced question.
I think Rocky was a great character, but I wouldn't like call Sylvester Stallone like a great actor. That to me is kind of
Right,
how I look at it. Like
but he needed a good performance in order to pull that character
sure.
off,
Yeah,
though.
but
Yeah.
I think this is more focused on just on the actual characters, which makes it kind of
Okay.
interesting. Mount
Sure.
Rushmore of best movie characters. I mean, that's partially also going to be determined by what's your genre of movies that you like. You know what I mean? If you're, for
Right.
me, I'm more of an action sci-fi kind of guy when it comes to like great characters. So, I mean, obviously I'm thinking like Jason Bourne. I mean, those type of things pop in my head. I don't know that I could narrow it down to 4, right? I mean, obviously Rocky would be one for me. That would be a
Yep.
best movie character. And I thought that they saved that franchise with some of the later
Mhm.
ones. They kind of started
Yeah.
to ruin it in the 90s a little bit. And the one with Tommy Gunn and all that, but I thought the last one really saved it. And I'd say Rocky. And then there was some crossover with him and the Creeds and his role there. And so to me,
Yep.
part of being great characters, it's got to have some long lasting, you know, feeling. I mean, even young people who weren't alive ever during the Rocky movies can still they know who it is, right? So I got to put Rocky
Sure.
in there for me. That has to be one for me. I'm a
One for
big fan
me.
of the Jason Bourne series too, Ryan. I
Okay.
loved those, so he would be one for me. But go ahead.
I think one for me, without question, would be the Joker. I would definitely lean more towards the The Dark Knight
Ledger.
version of the Joker, the
Yeah.
Heath Ledger version. Yeah, because I mean, Jack Nicholson did a great job back in the day, right? Like he was a really good Joker, but Heath Ledger, I think, took that role to another level.
What's
Joaquin
funny is,
Phoenix
Ryan,
also did a good job with it as well.
I
But
think the
yeah,
Joker characters have been better acted and better developed than a lot of the Batman characters in those
oh,
movies,
easily.
in
Yeah, I
my
don't even think it's
personal
close.
opinion.
Yep,
Which I'm one of those people that I always root for the good guy. Just always been that kind of
sure.
guy. I didn't have any Decepticons when I was a kid. I only had Autobots, that kind of guy. You know what I mean? I didn't have any Cobra people. I only had GI Joes. But you have to be able to look back at those and be like, the bad guys and most of the Batmans were
Yep.
way better characters than the Batman. And not always. Like the Arnold Schwarzenegger Mr. Freeze or whatever one was pretty terrible. The Penguin one
Dr.
was pretty
Freeze.
gross.
Dr. Freeze, baby. Oh
Yeah, that
yeah.
was pretty terrible. But a lot of them, I mean, the bad guys were better than, I mean, Poison Ivy, Uma Thurman's Poison Ivy was better played and better developed than the Batman character. So that's an interesting one. But yeah, Joker is definitely on the top of my. Well, here's one. I mean, Superman for me has to be one. Christopher Reeve Superman has to be one for me.
Okay.
So my mom said I was Superman for about 5 or 6 straight Halloweens when I was a kid. I had a homemade Superman outfit they could kind of stretch out for me. So I've got Rocky, Superman, Jason Bourne. Trying to think of some other, and I'm also trying to pick people that were in like multiple movies, not just like in one movie. I'll have to think about that. I'm not sure who my fourth would be, Ryan. Clark Griswold.
I am trying to think of like who else would be.
Yeah, like I love the Star Wars franchise, but I don't know if any of the individual characters were ever like great characters as much as it was just they were great movies more so than anything
Jar
else.
Jar
I'm trying to
Binks.
think.
Just kidding.
Yeah, oh
Obviously.
god, that's so
Just
bad.
kidding.
So bad.
Jar
Yeah,
Jar.
I'd have to think about that one, Ryan. I have to think about
Yeah.
that one.
I'm trying to think of a couple more off the rip. This is one that I should have had time. Pete, you should have thrown this chat in before the show even started to give me a little bit more time, but
Mhm,
obviously joking. But yeah, the Joker's the one that easily comes to mind. Like I'm trying to think of maybe a couple. I'm a big superhero guy, so like I
mhm.
trying to think of like who are some of my favorites. I don't know. Like I thought Captain America was done incredibly well, right? Like
Yes,
incredibly well on
there you go.
this reformat. Like that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, you could do a Mount Rushmore of just Marvel characters, really.
You
I
could,
mean,
you could.
you could do Iron. I thought, sometimes a character is made specifically for an actor, and that's partly why I think Rocky was so good. Because, like, I don't know that anyone could have played Rocky the way that Sylvester Stallone played Rocky, and I don't think there was a better Iron Man. There could have never been a better Iron Man than Robert Downey Jr. in my opinion.
Sure,
Like
sure.
he was perfect for Iron Man. And so yeah, that's a good one with
I,
if you're gonna talk the
I got two
Marvel.
more. Got
Go
two
ahead.
more. Just popped in my head. Denzel is Herman Boone. Herman Boone was a fantastic character from Friday
Mhm.
Remember the Titans. And then my other one that just popped in my head was Gladiator, which was what's
Okay.
his name?
Yeah.
Played Gladiator. He was awesome.
Yeah,
He was
Russell
awesome as
Crowe.
Gladiator. Yeah, Russell
Yeah.
Crowe's great as Gladiator.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. I'll be honest with you, you talk about Captain America when they killed off Captain America at the end of Endgame. I literally and Iron Man at the end of Endgame. I just literally lost all interest in the Iron Man or in the
Yeah.
Marvel franchise.
Oh, that
So,
Iron Man death was devastating. Was
oh
devastating.
man,
Oh,
it was crushing,
oh, yeah.
crushing. I
I had another
am
one that just popped in my head. I can't
Iron
even
Man.
think though.
I've actually got my 4 now, Ryan.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was thinking back in the day, but I've actually got my 4. And anyone that knows me is not going to be surprised by these. Superman, Rocky, Captain America, and Iron Man. Those are my 4. I kicked off Jason Bourne. I had to
Okay.
because Captain America would kick the crap out of Jason Bourne, so I had to go
It's fair. It's very fair. Man, I just had another one that just completely popped out of my head. I can't believe that happens. That is very sad. Very, very sad. Maybe if
there.
it comes back, I'll say it at some point. But it's a great question, Pete. Great
Yeah,
question.
I'm curious what some of the people in the chat are putting out in for this one, Ryan, because there's always good suggest the Arnold as Mr. Freeze made my
Oh,
day.
I got one. I got one. Mel Gibson as William Wallace in Braveheart was a
Yeah.
fantastic role. Love that
You
character.
know,
Love that
if I was to put that type of character, Aragorn is one that would I'd have to think about. I thought was it Viggo Mortensen, right? I thought he was tremendous as Aragorn in the Lord of the
Yep.
Rings franchise.
Yep.
He gets honorable mention. He gets.
Okay.
I'll tell you what. If I had to make a Mount Rushmore for I'm going to cheat, Ryan. I'm going to make a second Mount Rushmore for foreign actors, like guys that played foreign, just so I can have a second one. Now I can add Russell Crowe for the Gladiator. I can add, you know what I mean? So now I can add some more. Viggo Mortensen's not, he would be on there for the role he played. So that would allow me to have even more.
I
Yeah.
also want to do a series. I want to throw it into this bucket instead. No more movies, Pete. I'm also going to throw like Arya Stark from Game of Thrones in there because she was a great character. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Wasn't a huge
I'm gonna
fan of
cheat.
the Game of Thrones, to be honest with you.
Love Game of
Wasn't a really
Thrones,
big fan.
man. That was great.
Yeah.
Oh, if we're going to TV shows too, then you can start talking about like I was a big How I Met Your Mother fan. Marshall Erickson from How I Met Your Mother. Please let me get that. Yeah, but that's it. I guess that's a different question. So Pete, throw in another super chat, man. We'll talk about some television series
Movie
next. All right.
characters. Yes. There we go. All right. Let's get back to here. We got some football questions today too, Ryan.
We had Jacob Hayden who said top 3 floor ceiling linebackers on Notre Dame's top 2025 board. What's your dream class at the position?
Well,
Top
I've
3
talked
floor.
about this a little bit the other day on the message board, Ryan, and I obviously when I talk dream class, I always include guys that are already in the class. I'm not going to be that guy that kicks guys out of the class. I find that to be disrespectful. But when I was going over the dream class, obviously for me, Noah McHale is one for me. Everybody knows I love Noah McHale. Marco Jones would be another one, and then for me after that, it's kind of one of Jeremiah Wusu-Boateng, Madden
Nathaniel.
Feriamo.
Nathaniel.
Yeah,
Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, yeah.
You
One of
combine
those
the
2
brothers.
guys. If I could do 4, if I can only do 3, it's McHale, Owusu-Boateng, one of those guys. But I really would want Marco Jones in this class because I think he's phenomenal. But I also
Yep.
think he brings some really unique positional flexibility. Even if he stays as a linebacker, there are things you can do with him on third down that you can't do with any of the other linebackers. And I
Sure.
just think his film is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, in all honesty, Ryan, if Marco Jones is like, you know what, screw it, I want to play offense, I'd be like, cool, recruit him as an H-back. I mean, he is just a really excellent football player that I would like to get in the class. But if I can only pick one, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, if I can only do 3 and I can only pick one, I can't do or, I'd go Noah McHale, Marco Jones, and Josiah Kia. Simply because Josiah Kia is already in the class. That would be my 3. If I could only do that. But the thing is,
Sure.
there's so many good linebackers.
Yep.
It's like there's guys that they could get instead of the guys I picked that I'm like, okay, doesn't change my opinion of this class at all.
Well, the good thing about Marco Jones is that the fact that he is such a long, athletic kid that can do a couple different things is you might be able to talk yourself into like, hey guys, can we get to 4 now? Can we get to 4 now? If Nathaniel Wusu-Boateng's still out there, and you want like, hey man, we got to take Nathaniel Wusu-Boateng. We can't say
Yes.
no to Nathaniel
Well,
Wusu-Boateng.
and that's the thing, Ryan, is I do think Notre Dame would do that. I do think if they were sitting there and let's say that Noah McHale wanted to commit and I don't know, pick another linebacker, Christian Jones or Marco Jones or whoever.
Anton Delorier.
There you
Antoine
go.
Delorier.
If Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng still wanted to come, I
Mhm.
don't think they'd say no. I mean, that's the thing. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's partly why some decisions are being made about, CJ May and potential 4th offensive tackle because this is such a good year at other positions, or they're in such a great place with certain positions. It's like, do we take a 4th offensive tackle or shoot for the moon and try to get Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, and Devin Williams? Like they don't need a 3rd safety, but they're trying to take one because Jadon Blair is too good to say no to. And when you fill up at other positions with good football players that aren't, elite football players, then that has to come from somewhere. That number has to come from somewhere. And I think
Yep.
they're starting to realize that and make some decisions based off that, right?
I don't think there's a lot of wrong answers at linebacker. I mean, honestly, even if you just like, let's say hypothetically, you only take 3 and you have Josiah Kia, Marco Jones, and you end up with Anthony Sacca. Like, is that a wrong answer? Like, that's not a wrong answer, man. That's just a different combination that could potentially be a thing. I mean, the floor ceiling question part of this for Jacob is the very interesting part because there's a lot of high ceilings in this linebacker group in 2025, man. Like, it's hard to just pick 3. I mean,
Yeah.
Marco would be right there, maybe number one for me overall. I mean, Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng has some silly ceiling. Like, he could be absolute monster. But then after that, I mean, you could say Noah McHale. You could also say Christian Jones, because I mean that kid's a 6'3" kid that probably runs the 4.5s and literally is a great offensive player too as a receiver. It's just like there's so many high ceiling players on the board, man.
Madden
It's hard to choose
Ferrimo's
three.
got a phenomenal ceiling as well. He's another guy that I like a lot. Marco and Noah McHale would be my top two, just because their body types are so good and they're so athletic and versatile. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Ryan, this is a phenomenal linebacker class. I'm not as high on Anthony Sacca after watching his junior film, but in other
I like the
years,
junior film.
it wouldn't have changed. That's fine. I didn't. I didn't think he adjusted well to the weight. But when you look at it, I mean, there's Gavin Nix, who's an outstanding player. You know, there's Nasir Wyatt, who's a really, I mean, this is a fun, just nationally speaking, this is a phenomenal linebacker class nationally. I mean, if you need linebackers and you're going into the 25 cycle, you're feeling really good about if you're a top program, that you're going to get pretty good players. Because to your point, normally, Ryan, when we're doing dream classes, it's like you got to hit the inside straight to come anything close to a dream class. Where it's like I did this when I did my Must Gets article the other day. I don't know if you saw that, Ryan, but like I did one of these two, receivers or one of these three corners. But at linebacker, I was like, give me one of these 9 guys, and I feel like you've met your needs because of how well you've done in other classes. And if you get multiple of these guys, and you may say, hey, I like this guy better than that guy. And like my opinion of Anthony Sacca is I didn't like his junior film relative to the other guys on the board. But what I was going to say is you still look at him in past years and you're like, he's still one of your top 2-3 guys compared to past years. But this is such a deep linebacker class that you can do one of two things, Ryan. You can either be picky and say, hey, we really like these guys. We're going to focus on these guys. And then we know there's good backup options. Or you can say, hey, look, there's 9 guys on the board. We will take the first 2. You can go one of those 2 directions and you're still going to be in a good position. So I think Notre Dame is in a good place there. Now, top floor linebackers is another one, Ryan, that I'm curious to get your thoughts on. For me, I think the kid they just offered from Georgia, the Canadian kid from Georgia, is one of those really high floor guys, just because, I mean, already right now, he looks like a junior in college physically. I mean, just jacked up, physical, powerful. To me, he's the guy that's in my conversation for highest floors just from body type. Now, he's still learning the game quite a bit, in my opinion, but just physically, like that dude is going to show up, and you're not going to ask yourself, gee, is that guy strong enough to play at this level? Like, he's strong enough to play at this level now when you watch him play. So he'd be one of those high floor guys for me. Yeah. Marco Jones is another high floor guy for me as well.
Yeah. I would say Gavin Nix is another guy too. I don't think Gavin's got the best frame of all the linebackers, but he's a very smart player, if nothing else. He seems like he's always in the right spot. So
he knows how to play, Ryan. Like he knows how to get to the ball carrier. To your point, like maybe he'll never be the star that some of these other guys are. But you know who he reminds me of? He reminds me of a more athletic Tavon Coney. That's what he reminds me of. Where he's not like he's not that elite athlete. He's not that elite length. He's not, he's not all, but the kid just makes a ton of plays. I remember watching Tavon Coney at the pro day thinking, how'd this guy rack up like 200 some tackles the last 2 years? You know what I mean? Because he just doesn't look the part. He's not very big. He's not a great athlete. But when you watch Tavon Coney play, guy was always around the flipping football. And that's Gavin Nix to me, but I would argue a better athlete than what Tavon was. That's who pops in my head every time I watch Gavin Nix play. It's not going to blow you away with elite tools. The kid makes plays, and there's value to that at linebacker, right? Because you know this, you can go get 3 elite athletes and end up not having a great linebacking core because you got to know how to play. That's a position, and I've compared like middle linebacker is like the quarterback of the defense. You've got to have it up here as well. You just can't be athletic, and that's a good one, Ryan. I like that Gavin Nix pick as far as high floors. That's a really good one. Really,
I think Noah McHale has a high floor too. He's pretty physically advanced. Like he's pretty well put together. He's got good length. He's a good athlete. Like he just, I have it hard to. It would be hard for that kid to miss. Like if he's not like, even if he doesn't become a superstar, at least a good player, right? Like at least a guy that's going to be a 6'3", 230 something pound linebacker that's going to be able to be explosive in short areas. Like, yeah, Noah McHale would be another one that I think is at least a good player on the college level.
Yeah, that's a good question. Off to a very good start today, Ryan.
Pete Weber, how early do you see a guy like Owen Strebig contributing significant playing time? What early improvements must he focus on?
I addressed this last night, Ryan, so I'm curious to get your opinion on this one.
I think for me, Owen is a young man that if we're talking about just what he needs to improve on first and foremost, Pete, because I think that that will determine how quickly he's able to get onto the field, the improvements that he's able to make. One is I think pass protection is pretty raw at times because if you watch him on film, the only true pass set you see are either him jump setting, which just basically means that off the line of scrimmage, you were trying to make contact early, you're not getting into traditional pass set, or he does an occasional 45-degree set, which again, it's a true pass set, but it's not like I haven't seen him do a vertical set, for instance, right? Where it's truly in space, letting a defensive end have to work an outside or inside shoulder, and then you're able to read and react based upon the movement of the defensive lineman. So I think pass sets are still a question mark as far as what he will be able to contribute early on in the passing game as a pass protector. And I also think that he's just a young man that he's tall, he's a little leggy, he's still developing into his body, and I think that there's a coordination thing that's going to come with time because I don't think there's a lack of flexibility with him. I think he bends pretty well. I think his foot quickness is good. It's a solid level, and I think he's incredibly long. So those things tell me he should be able to last at offensive tackle. He shouldn't be a guy that has to kick inside for any reason. Like he has the tools in order to stay on the outside. Those are the things that I think that he needs to improve upon. I mean, how quickly you get on the field is an interesting question because that is not as much on. Well, it is partly on Owen as far as the improvements that are needed early on in his career, but it also is pertinent to the roster, right? I mean, 2025, Charles Jagasaw is going to be a junior, so he's going to be potentially at left tackle as a multi-year starter there. You're also going to have right tackle. I mean, Emil Wagner potentially going to be in the conversation. Gerby Lemberts. Like, there's going to be some guys in front of him. So I would say he's more probably a guy that 2026, 2027 is a guy that is in serious contention just because there's going to be a little. It's a good thing that, I mean, it's a good problem to have. You might have a slight logjam at offensive tackle for the first year or two that he's on campus because you do have some guys that are still relatively young that should be in that conversation at that point.
You pretty much said what I said, Ryan. I don't think he's a year one guy unless he makes like a big senior season jump in a lot of the areas you talked about.
And
Yes,
most offensive tackles are not year one guys, so it's not a
yeah. Joe
negative
Walt's are
one.
rare. I mean,
Yep.
they're very rare. You don't see that happen very often. And Joe Walt did not start as a freshman until three other guys had gotten injured. Let's not forget that as well. They went with Blake Fisher, who's a freshman, got hurt. They went with Tosh Baker. He got hurt. They went with Michael Carmody. He got hurt. And then they put Joe Walt in there, and the rest is history. So even Joe Walt wasn't so good as a freshman that they were like, hey, at least in practice, we've got to play this guy. Or maybe you could say he was, and they just, for whatever, stubbornly didn't do it. But you can't say, well, they didn't want to play a freshman because a freshman started the season at left tackle in Blake Fisher. So It is interesting how that played out. Is Steve Smith not in the Hall of Fame, Ryan?
Steve Smith Sr.?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think he is. No.
How? How's he not in the Hall of Fame?
I think he was more longevity than a great overall player, in my opinion. I don't know. Steve Smith?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to put Andre Johnson in for his numbers, I mean, Steve Smith was going for 1,000 yards at the age of 35. You know, I thought, man, like, goodness gracious. I didn't realize he wasn't in the Hall of Fame. I think longevity matters, but you've got to be pretty good for a long time. And I think he was. The other question that we've had a lot of people talk about Andre Johnson is who he had a quarterback. And I understand all that, but
Matt Schaub.
the reality
Matt Schaub was a good player, though. Matt Schaub was a good quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, and Reggie Wayne produced after Peyton Manning. I mean, he had a 1,300-yard season with rookie Andrew Luck on his team. You know what I mean? It's like
I don't want to hear about Andre Johnson having to deal with Matt Schaub when the majority of Torrey Holt's career had to deal with Mark Bolger as his quarterback.
Right.
Okay? I don't want
That's
to
a
hear
good
that
point.
conversation.
Because he only played with Kurt Warner for what, 2-3 years?
2 years? Yeah,
right?
until Mike Martz started going to just pure empty all the time and got Kurt's
Right.
brain scrambled off of
Right.
concussions for a couple years. Like, idiot. Like Martz. God.
Yes. Yeah, I know you're not a fan. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think Reggie I mean, yeah, Reggie Wayne to me is, yeah. I mean, excuse me, Torrey Holt. I I think you can watch film and say, "Hey, this guy throwing him the ball was a great player, but he was
Yep.
open all the time." And him
Right.
being open all the time is not because of Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning was great at getting the ball to those open guys, getting them into the right call and all that. I mean, he was great in those areas, but he still had to go make those plays, and he did.
I will
So
say this is Reggie Wayne was very fortunate though. He went right from Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck, not the worst
sure,
quarterback
sure.
situations of all time.
Andrew had a little bit of a buffer period that first year with typical rookies, turn the ball over a lot. But yeah, I mean,
Sure.
to me, you shouldn't punish a guy because he happened to play with a great quarterback. And I
Oh,
think
I
you can
agree.
look at players that didn't play with great quarterbacks and still say, "Hey, that was a great player." Like I just the way that I reacted when I found out Steve Smith wasn't in the Hall of Fame. Well, who was the great quarterback throwing to Steve Smith his whole career? I mean, I can look at a guy and be like, "That's a great player," and who you can agree disagree, but there's other players that would fit this mold for you that you could say, "Hey, that
Mhm.
guy was a great player. He didn't have great talent around him, but that guy was a great player."
Yeah.
And so yeah, and also I would argue that he played in yeah, I mean, he didn't. The AFC South was not the greatest division for a chunk of Andre Johnson's career either. And to your point, Matt Schaub did have some production. I
Yeah,
mean, he
Matt
put
Schaub
up
was a
some
good
pretty
solid
good
quarterback.
numbers. So yeah,
Matt Schaub does have the NFL record though, because I actually do think he was a good solid quarterback, but I
yeah.
believe he has the NFL record for the most career pick sixes thrown, which is a pretty
Matt
hilarious stat.
Schaub does. That's
Yeah, Matt
interesting.
Schaub.
I,
Yeah.
I I think Mike Hoff has this the best way. He says Andre was a top 10 wide receiver in any given season. That's very good, not Hall of Fame worthy. I think that's a fair
Mm,
thing to say. He was very
sure.
good for a period of time. I just don't. And again, I don't even necessarily have an issue with Andre Johnson getting in.
Yeah.
It's
It's more
it's
the
more so
timing.
of first ballot and getting in over with guys like Reggie Wayne and Torrey Holt and Steve Smith still out there.
Right.
I mean that's kind of my issue. And of course, as a Broncos fan, I'm also biased as well towards Rod Smith. I don't think Rod Smith gets nearly enough credit for how good of a player he was. I mean, you talk about a guy that produces without a top quarterback. He had a 200 catch seasons with like Brian Greasy as a starting quarterback. Okay, so you want to talk
Former
about
Michigan great.
producing. Yes, you want to talk about producing at a high level with not a great quarterback around you. Go look at some of the things that Rod Smith did in his career with Brian Greasy as the
Yeah.
quarterback. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, great players
he's
make great wide receivers
yeah,
make average quarterbacks look good. Like, I always think
yeah,
about like Terrell Owens made Jeff Garcia look like he was pretty good for a couple of years. You're just like,
yes,
Jeff Garcia's not very good. Like, let's
exactly,
be honest with ourselves
exactly.
here.
Exactly. Did who and yeah, you are correct. He had several
Oh, I
quarterbacks. We
think
could have a
he might have had
conversation about
Elvis
that.
Gerback at some point too. It
Yeah.
was just like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
Yep. No doubt. Good questions today, guys. Really enjoying these so far.
Mark Avalone, NCAA decides to have an old school Iron Man football tournament from present Notre Dame roster. Who are your 11 two-way players and what positions do they play on both offense and defense? Bonus, who kicks?
Oh my
Whoa.
gosh. Oh man. So we're going like necessary roughness 11-man football. Man, I'm not going to have any way to answer this. I'll tell you this. I think I know who my quarterback is. I think that one for me is kind of easy. And my
Wait,
quarterback is
present
Josh.
Notre Dame roster?
Yes, current Notre Dame roster.
Okay.
Yeah. My quarterback's probably Josh Burnham, and I'm just gonna run some sort of power running type thing. I don't I mean, like, as if
Can Riley Leonard play
unless
safety? Riley Leonard could play single
yeah,
high
there
free
you
safety.
go.
Go ahead.
There
Go
you
ahead.
go. Um, I mean, boy, so you're just playing 11-man I don't know, man, if I could do that. I really don't. Well, Charles Jagasaw would be on there, and
Because he can
Billy
play
Shrout
defense.
would be on there because they both were
Yeah,
very good defensive players, so
sure.
they would be on there. Man, that's a tough one. That's a
Sam
really
Pendleton being a guard because you just be a space eating nose on
yeah,
defense and then you play
yeah.
guard.
You've gotta be able to give me some sort of I can use 13 because I can't find I mean, back in the day when you'd have that and any semblance of that, you also played a 5-2. So, like, where's my 5th offensive lineman gonna play? You know what I mean? So you got to give me some kind of one sub out on both sides of the ball.
I might go with Cooper Flanagan as my tight end because he can play defensive end. He'd be pretty
Yeah.
dang good defensive end too.
Yeah.
So let's put
Yeah.
Cooper
Yeah,
at
he
tight end
was.
defensive
He
end. So
was.
yeah,
You know who surprisingly had a good year on defense this year, Ryan, and I didn't even know he was going to play defense until this year, was Jack Larson. So
yeah,
he had a really big
he's pretty
sack.
good. Yeah,
He wasn't as good as Cooper Flanagan, because you and I have said when
sure.
Cooper was recruited, if Notre Dame wanted to play Cooper Flanagan at defensive end, I would be like, all right, I'd give him a shot there. You
After
know?
Keon Keeley decommitted, I was like, you know what? I wouldn't be
Yeah.
opposed to looking at Cooper Flanagan at defensive end. I would not be opposed.
Jack's
To that.
not playing defense at Notre Dame. I just was
No,
surprised how well he did. But Cooper Flanagan
yeah, he
could be
did
a
well.
two-way player. He could be a two-way
Sure.
player. Oh, man. Oh, and you got Micah Bell could maybe be a running back. Xavier, well, you have one of the best two-way players in all of college football if you wanted to have him that way, and that'd be Xavier Watts. I mean, he'd be a legit, okay, yes, put him over there and then let him do that as well. He could certainly be one.
Yep.
Christian Gray. I mean, you're Benjamin Morrison. Those guys all played offense in high school.
Christian Gray was a really good wide receiver.
Micah Bell
yeah.
would be my slot on both sides of the ball. He'd be my nickel and he'd be my slot receiver if I had to go both ways. So secondary to receiver is actually not that hard because a lot of those kids from
Drake Bowen would be my running back. Would be my running back linebacker. So
there
Drake
you go.
Bowen. Yeah.
Well, you know who? You know, I changed my mind on quarterback. It's not Josh Burnham. It's Jack Kaiser. I forgot Jack was a really good quarterback in high school, state champion quarterback in high school. But maybe I'll do this. I'll have Burnham. I'll have a backfield of Burnham, Drake Bowen, and Jack Kaiser. Run an old single wing with some of those big boys, because then Burnham can throw. It's just I'm just glad we don't have to make these decisions. Who kicks? I don't know.
I don't know who's a good kicker. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm sure Drake Bowen could kick. I mean, athletically, I don't know that there's a whole lot Drake Bowen couldn't do.
Well, Riley Leonard's my quarterback and single high free safety. I'm sure he's a quarterback, so he can shoot basketball and he can kick a football. Let's be honest.
I'm sure.
So
yeah, that's a fun one, Mark. But that would take so much. I'll say that's one of those message board ones that would create some fun off-season conversation for sure. I just want to know where Mark's head was when he thought of that. That's I wonder, was he watching Necessary Roughness and he's like, I wonder what it'd be like for Notre Dame.
You know what it was?
Like that.
I bet it was the Pro Bowl game thing that they do now, because they do a flag football game where they just put guys on both sides of the ball as well. Who was it? It was a wide receiver that had an interception on the defensive side of it was Rashid Shaheed, the wide receiver from New Orleans. I think he had like a pick six during that thing or whatever, and he plays wide receiver. So I think it's the two-way type of flag football games we just saw, possibly.
Didn't watch it.
Jacob Hayden. Am I crazy for saying I'm excited to see Jason Onye with an expanded role, potentially with Gabriel Rubio being away from the team?
Well, I don't know that Jason Onye is going to have an expanded role now that Gabriel's gone, because they both played. I mean, they were both there. I think what's going to happen is this opens up an opportunity for Donovan Heinisch to play more this spring. It opens up an opportunity perhaps for an Armel Mukam, a Devin Houston, a Tyson Ford, one of those younger guys to maybe challenge and get more reps in that regard. But, you know, I don't know that you're going to have a situation, Ryan, with Gabriel out, that Jason all of a sudden becomes the number two at both spots and he takes all those reps, in my opinion. I will say this. I understand where the excitement is coming from, because I do think that Jason Onye is a player to keep an eye on for really taking a jump this year as part of that rotation, because of the fact that he finally got some experience, got to be on the field, got to learn some lessons, and now he enters year 4. I think he can end up becoming a really, really quality backup. And I would say backup. I don't even think that's a respectful enough term. I think it's a part of the rotation. And the thing about it is, the better those guys play, the less you have to play Howard Cross and Riley Mills. And whenever I say that, I'm not talking about against Texas A&M or Florida State or Louisville. I'm talking about like in other games. A lot of those other games, you don't have to play them as much in those other games, because you can go with the deeper rotation, take the wear and tear off of their legs, so that way you can ramp up their snaps in some of the bigger games, but not feel like you're missing a beat. And that's what I think this defensive line has a chance to do next year, Ryan, is I think that you have a chance to have even more production from that second wave in 2024 than you did 23, because so many of those guys that were part of that second wave this year in 2024 were really first-year rotation guys in 2023. Onye, Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka. Those guys were all this was their first taste of college football, and now they're all going to be back and get some much needed experience in another year in the weight room. So I think that's something that has me excited about what this defensive line is going to be able to do this year.
I'm so excited that my webcam decided to fall off
Yeah.
the mount there. So that was good. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think Jacob, I am very excited about Jason Onye because I think that Jason Onye has an argument for one of the top probably 2 to 3 most physically gifted interior defensive linemen. I mean, he's a really talented kid. And honestly, I think he should have played a little bit more at times this past year because I thought there were some games where I'm just like, that kid's unblockable for a few reps that he has, right? So I'm genuinely excited just to see more of him overall. Whether it's expanded and how much it is, we'll see, obviously. But I think that kid is, I mean, at 6'4.5", 6'5", with length and 290 plus pounds, that kid can move, man. So definitely want to see more Jason Onye this year because I think that kid is physically gifted if he puts it all together.
Agree.
Because then Brian, we also have to talk about like the next wave of stuff, right? Like we always have these conversations of like who's next after that, right? And it's like after next year, you're going to be out without Howard Cross and Riley Mills after this next season. So it's like, who's the next wave of interior defensive lineman? Is Jason Onye the next guy that in the 5th year he's ready to really take that massive step forward? We'll see. We will see.
Yeah.
We had Aiden Benami. What's Aiden? Do you prefer 2 big ends or 1 and a Viper or neither?
And then he said neither as in different than those. So like not a Viper, not a big end, something different.
Oh, so like a strong side end and a weak side defensive end is basically what we're talking about
Something,
here.
yeah. Like to me, so what I would explain it to this way is: do you have 2 true edge players, like true 2 ends, or when you define Viper, do you have it as, because that's just the thing, Ryan, is like, well, it depends on what kind of Viper we're talking about. I mean, an Isaiah Foskey type of Viper is going to be a whole lot of a different player than a Josh Burnham type of Viper or a Jordan Patel type of Viper, who were guys that would maybe do more in coverage or can move around more. I mean, they're just different types of players. For me, I think in today's era, it is very beneficial. There's a big difference between being beneficial and being something you need. It's very beneficial when you have a Viper type, whatever you want to call it, that can do a little bit of everything. He can play off the edge. He can play the run. He can even stack and kind of move around and be a free floater in certain situations. He can drop into coverage, whether it be running with wheels, dropping under hook curls, taking the flats. If you can have a guy that can be very versatile and do a lot of different things that allows you to match up with different types of looks so you don't have to sub a lot of the time, I think there's benefits to that. I don't know that it's a must. So I would say I would prefer that type of edge rusher. But at the end of the day, that position has to provide me more pass rushing value than what it did at Notre Dame in 2023. That to me is a no-brainer. You can't have that position not provide disruptive playmaking ability. That's the one thing it has to have, in my opinion, however you use it.
I am fully on board with the Viper style and big end style item personally because what is something that people always talk about when they talk about getting great offensive coordinators? They always talk about pre-snap motion and pre-snap movement. You know why they do that? Because they're trying to get a defensive line and linebackers into conflicts. They're trying to get them into a bad look and be able to take advantage of them. To have a Viper that can play standing up at times, can play with the hand in dirt at times, could work off the line of scrimmage at times. Maybe you go to more of a 3-down look comparative to a 4-down look. I think it's very valuable because that's how you create mismatches and matchups, and it's how you also negate matchups because offensively, ultimately, you're trying to put guys in bad position and take advantage of them, right? So I think if you have just 2 big ends, 2 guys that are just hand in the dirt, that's all they can do. If I motion to an empty set, for instance, where you don't have the proper nickel or dime look to be able to just match up accordingly with the 4 down front, then you're going to put a big end potentially into coverage where that's just not what he is meant to be doing, man. That is just not the role that you want to be seeing him in, obviously. So I think in the modern game, in the NFL and college, where it is so much more space oriented now, having a guy that if you get flexed out can work and maybe move out to an overhang position. But when it's an obvious passing situation and you have the look you like, you get into a 4 down or a 3 down against certain looks. I think that's very valuable. I do. So I think that having that Viper that is a little bit more of a versatile player that can impact multiple ways of the game, I think that is a very valuable, especially in today's world. I will say I'm not opposed to having two. I'm not even say Viper types, but more like weak side defensive end spots, as far as like guys that are just true pass rushers, maybe not run sets against obvious passing situations. Right, that's where situational football comes into effect.
Yeah, I mean, Duke kind of did that with Mike Elko. The way that they used RJ Open, they didn't use him as like a big end. He was just a pass rusher, even as the field player. He's just a pass rusher. I mean, he didn't do a whole lot of, set the edge the way that Notre Dame has used their big end in the past. And I think Notre Dame is moving to a little bit more of a like they had been kind of getting by with a big defensive tackle there in recent years. You had Riley Mills, you had Myron Tungvaloa Mosa. I think that they would prefer a Khalid Kareem type minimum, and then they can obviously get away with a guy like Javonte Jean-Baptiste because you are playing more and more teams that are trying to get in space. And there's just tends to be less value in that type of thing. And I think having a guy like a Chris Burgess, why I think guys like Chris Burgess and players like that can be really good at that position is because if you have the right kind of Viper, Ryan, you can easily shift into a 3 down and not have to move personnel because that Viper can kind of come off ball, maybe play out and over top of a tight end or something like that, depending on what kind of player you have there. And you're going to have enough beef at that big end position to still hold up there. But you can't do that and sacrifice the ability to rush the quarterback. That's the challenge of finding that right type of player for that. And Notre Dame's had a little bit of a tough time finding that, which is why Javonte Jean-Baptiste was such a pleasant surprise because he gave them value in both areas. He was pretty good against the run this year, which is I wasn't surprised with his pass game production. He only had 5 sacks, had a lot of pressures, was a disruptive player. I think that's the thing we expected him to be, Ryan. What surprised me this season was he was a lot better playing the edge against the run than I thought he was going to be. That was the thing that kind of caught me off guard, and happily so for what he did.
Absolutely. We had the next question from Jacob Hayden. It says, fast forward to August 31st. First play of the game is 11 personnel. Who do you project the 3 wide receivers to be? Good question, Jacob.
Yeah, I think if I had to make a decision today, I think it would be just based on who's on the roster right now. I think you'd probably go Jaden Thomas in the boundary where they are right now. You'd have Chris Mitchell to the field and either Jaden Greathouse or Jordan Faison in the slot. I think that's where it would be today. And that's mainly because, Deion Colsey still has a lot to prove. Bo Collins isn't on the roster right now, so I need to see what he looks like. I could easily see Bo there. I could see Deion there. The boundary is the one that would be the least it probably be most up for grabs. Look, the staff really likes Jaden Thomas. They're going to find a place for him. I'm just hoping that other players step up enough to where you don't have to keep Jaden in the boundary all the time. That's the key. Because I think that Jaden Thomas is at his best when you can move him around and do some different things with him. And in some games, maybe the boundary is where you play him more, but other games, maybe you play him a little bit, in different spots. I just would like to see them get a little bit more creative with how they move their personnel around. And as I'm breaking down LSU's film run, I did like how LSU did that at times this year. They would use like motions and different things to get their X over to a trips and get their X over into some screen game situations, get them on some wheel route concepts, get them on some seam stuff. They ran a play this year at a 2x2 with the tight end of the boundary, tight end attached in the X off the field, and they ran him in motion. And they did, I'm trying to remember the specific pass concept, but they basically ran like an over and some kind of like stop route. But they basically did a post snap switch with number 2 and the X coming across, and the X ran up the seam and got open, some different things like that where you could get them over the middle of the field. I mean, you've got to get creative, in my opinion. And one thing Notre Dame did not do a good enough job this year, in my opinion, and one of my bigger criticisms of Jared Parker was you pretty much just when a receiver lined up, this is where he was going to play. And there was only a couple times we really saw them move guys around. I think one of the best play calls of the season came against, I think it was Wake Forest, where they put Jaden Greathouse into the boundary and put Jordan Faison at Z and used Jordan Faison to clear out the post and then brought Jaden Greathouse over. It's like, where has that been all year? and Jordan Faison's not going to be playing Z 95% of the snaps he's on the field. It's just not where he's ideally suited. But there's value to putting a guy like that in that role for him and then also for other things. And I think the best coaches are ones that are willing to say, hey, look, I know Emeka Egbuka already plays a lot of slot, but Ohio State made some adjustments in that game to say, hey, their outside corners are killing us right now. So we've got to do some things to get some of these matchups we like in the slot to help us take advantage. And Notre Dame didn't do nearly enough of that. And I'm hoping the Mike Denbrock does, because there's a lot of weapons this year that have Jaden Greathouse can make plays anywhere. There's just some spots he's better than others. Jaden Thomas can do a lot of different things. There's just some spots he's better than others. But even same like Bo Collins. I mean, Bo Collins has made plays out of slot before. There's different things you can do in different games to say, hey, we're going to take advantage of this particular matchup or this particular player, how he plays can really hurt their zone or this personnel matchup. You've got to be willing to have a little bit more willingness to move guys around to get into those favorable matchups than Notre Dame has shown in recent years, in my opinion. That's what I hope that we see more of this year.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're on the same page. It would be Jaden Thomas, Jaden Greathouse, and Chris Mitchell right now would be my preference. And then Jordan Faison, obviously, as a other guy that you can throw into the slot. And I think you can move him around a little bit to the field to kind of create some mismatches with his quickness and just overall speed. So yeah, I think that very interested to see how the boundary plays out, because again, Jaden Thomas probably gets the first shot. He can obviously do some things there, but is Bo going to get a large portion of that when he gets on campus? Deion Colsey, can he stay healthy? I think that boundary position is really going to be one that a lot of people are going to have their eyes on this year, because we know that it was just such a problem last season, right? Like, it just was not a good situation for Notre Dame because of all the injuries and just the inconsistencies overall. So the boundary, I think, is really going to tell the tale of how good the offense is going to be in 2024 or not.
Agree. And to add to that, Ryan, it has to be better, because Mike Denbrock uses that position so much more than we've seen the last couple of years. I mean, the boundary is basically an afterthought in the Notre Dame offense this year. It's hard to have a pass attack that's going to scare you when you're basically like, they're not even looking at the boundary guy. I mean, he's just an afterthought. It's hard. I mean, that's what I was still say. They still average 39 freaking points a game and 7 yards play. You know what I mean? It's just like you start to get a little fired up, man, about this year, because you're like, you think about all these issues and you're like, dude, they average almost 40 points a game. You know what I mean? Like, I'm looking forward to seeing what this offense is going to do in 2024. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Ida Benami, does having two great running backs like we have worry you that someone will end up leaving? LOL, yes, we have more than two. Hate that way of looking at it, but it's 2024.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Iden, but like, not every kid that's not number one leaves, right? I mean, that's just not the real. Like, I think we've turned it into that. Basically, now every top recruit, if he doesn't play as a freshman, he's going to leave. Very few of them actually left in that similar fashion. You're not seeing it as much as we're making it out to be. There's just assume, well, this guy's going to transfer. Oh, maybe he does. I don't know, but I just would encourage you, man, I don't know who's going to be on the roster in 2025. Neither do you. So don't worry about it. Just enjoy. If we only get 1 year of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, okay, so be it. I mean, we only get one of those years of those two together, because Jadarian goes out there, runs for 1,200 yards, and Jeremiah runs for 1,000 yards, and Jadarian goes pro. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, so I'm just, you know what it is, man? I'm just trying to change my outlook on life and saying, I don't know who's going to transfer. I don't know what's going to happen here or there. But you know what? What I know right now is in 2024, we're going to have Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love playing together. And we're going to have, Jabron Payne, as far as I know. And until those guys make decisions to leave, I'm not going to stress over who might leave. I'll address it if that happens. But I think part of that to Ryan, to your point, or to the point of the question is I do think coaches have to be more cognizant in the current era with this just open, players can leave whenever they want, that you have to be able to look at this and say, okay, how do we build systems to make sure everybody's happy? And it's not about happy, that's how you get beat, right? It's to do that. It's more about, I said it happy, I didn't mean happy. Everyone's being utilized in some way. That's the thing. And one thing I actually think Dylan McCullough did a really good job of the last 2 years was not so much keeping people happy, but saying, how can we use all these weapons that we have? We've got Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, and Chris Tyree. How do I fit these three guys together? Because not that I need to keep them happy, but how do I justify not playing one of them in some capacity? So this year,
Sure.
we saw Audric was the guy, right? We saw Jabron Payne get a lot of playing time. We saw Jeremiah Love get some snaps. Jadarian Price is working his way back from injury. He didn't get as many snaps. So what do? They put him back as the kick returner and let him be a kicker. He averaged 34 yards a kick return. That's a way to get him back into the flow. And then you saw Jabron Payne kind of later year emerge as like the third down back. They found a role for Devin Ford. So it's more so about use them. And if guys feel valued and they feel like they're being developed, there's a greater chance they stay. And that's what it comes down to. And it's also partly is you've got to be honest with them in the recruiting process. Because what happens with some of these kids is they get promised certain things and then those things aren't delivered upon. It's more so that than kid just showed up, coaches told him, hey, you're going to have to compete. We're not going to give you anything. He shows up and he competes and gets beat out and he leaves. That happens less than you might think. It's more so about your promise such and such. You get there and you realize a lot of that was just BS, that they were just giving me just to get me here, and there's no trust here, or other factors. So to me, you've got a lot of weapons at running back. I don't care about doing it in a way that keeps people happy. Again, I did misspeak on that. It's more about if you're a good football coach, you need to find a way to use Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Kedron Young, Aeneas Williams in some capacity on your football team in 2020, and Jabron Payne on your football team. Those guys can help you. You've got to find a way to utilize all their skill sets while also making sure that players are able to get into the flow, because that's the danger, Ryan. And I think that was a big issue on offense this year, is they would just do this constant play after play after play rotating. And it made it very hard for guys to get into a rhythm because they were just running on and off the field all the time. And it's not a coincidence that Notre Dame's two best players on offense this year were guys who hardly came off the field. You know what I mean? And when they did, it was like as a breather, Mitchell Evans and Audric Estime, where everybody else is just constantly in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And to me, that's the bad way to use everybody, because I have no problem using the 6-man wide receiver core. I have a problem using a 6-man wide receiver core the way Notre Dame did in 2023, where it's just every play somebody new is coming on the field, or 2 or 3 somebody's new. And I just don't think that's the way to do it, in my opinion.
I also don't worry about the running back position, Iden, just for a simple fact of that's a position that there's attrition all the time and there's turnover all the time. I mean, unfortunately, hey, let's be honest with ourselves. We knew last offseason, especially after Logan Diggs ended up transferring, you knew that Audric was probably gone after that year, barring something, injury setback or, that type of thing, right? Look at where you were 2 years ago. 2 years ago, you're talking about 2 running backs that were up near 1,000 yards rushing apiece, and Audric Estime and Logan Diggs. 2 years later, neither one of them are here, but we're not worried about it because running back has been recruited so well and developed so well that, hey, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. If after this year, Jadarian Price is gone or Jeremiah Love gone or whatever, hey, man, I hope it doesn't happen, but you still have Kedron Young. You still have Aeneas Williams. You still have 2 running backs coming in 2025. That's just a position that I'm just not worried about turnover that much, man. As long as you're recruiting well and you have a good developer, like I'm not worried about. There's other positions that I'd be like, dang, that's not good. But running back,
well, also too, Ryan, with running back and receiver, those are 2 positions. Like you talk about other positions, I'd be more concerned. I'd be more concerned if that was happening on the offensive line. And every year you have to cycle in freshmen and sophomores because you're losing guys. Running back's a plug-and-play position if you're talented. It really is. It's a position where a freshman or a sophomore can come in and have an impact immediately at receiver and running back. That if you lose a guy, like you said, and it's because it's like we have to also reprogram our minds, because is losing a guy like that any different than a guy suffering a torn ACL in fall camp, which happens all the time, and it's next man in, right? It's no different. And that's why you've got to recruit. I mean, if let's say one of the running backs left after the spring, and it's too late to replace that guy. Is that any different than Torian Folson tearing his ACL and being out for the year after the second carry of the game? No, it's next man up. And in that situation, they had CJ Prosise. They moved to running back. They had Josh Adams and Dexter Williams as true freshmen. So what happens when Torian goes down? Josh Adams slides up to number 2. CJ goes down. Josh Adams steps in, sets a freshman rushing record. To your point, Ryan, if you recruit well enough, and I said this in the show yesterday, Notre Dame, as the way the depth chart is right now, would have to have 4 guys go down before they get to Aeneas Williams. Think about how loaded you have to be at running back. It wasn't that long ago that Aeneas Williams steps on the Notre Dame roster, and he's the number 2 back the minute he steps foot on campus.
Yep.
Right? And now it's like he might be number 5 or number 4. So that's why you keep recruiting.
Man. Could use him in 2019.
Exactly. I was talking about this yesterday. I was like, when Tony Jones was banged up for the Georgia game, they just abandoned the run game. I mean, just completely abandoned the run game. And you're going to have trouble winning that way.
Yes. We had Salty Virginia Peanuts. I always almost say YouTube user when his questions come up. Should Super Bowl Monday be a national holiday? Should it be? Yes, probably.
No.
Probably.
No. The only day that I think
depends how you separate. Depends how you celebrate it. I would say Salty, but for some, yes.
I think what he's referring to national holidays. Everybody gets the day off of work. And
yes,
that I'm not.
Yes.
I'm not for. No, the only day right now that I would add as a national day off of work is Tuesday. Is election days. That would be the only one that I would do. But I understand where you're coming from.
Iden Benami, between Sunday Super Bowl and college football on Monday, it's like they're punishing us on purpose.
Yes. Well, same thing with like the Final Four. That's played on Saturday and Monday instead of Friday and Sunday, or So yeah, I get you. I feel you.
College football championship on Monday is stupid, if I must say. And that is dumb.
Agree.
Super Bowl Sunday is a tradition. Monday championship games is dumb.
And it's also the day that they play all their the majority of their games. I mean, that's the thing, is like the NFL would have a better justification for moving Super Bowl to Monday night than college football does, having their championship on a Monday night, in my opinion. I don't think either of them should be on a Monday night. I'm just saying, like, because the NFL could say, hey, we've been doing Monday Night Football for decades, but it's like, what's the justification for having the national championship on a Monday? Right. There isn't any, in my opinion.
It's really dumb. We had Rob Osgood with the question. Rob says, hey, guys, great news yesterday. Question about the quarterbacks. Deuce is a lefty. What differences besides the right tackle becoming the left tackle? Example, routes, runs, bootlegs, etc.
Well, for one, not every team reacts the way that we think about as fans when it comes to right tackle versus left tackle when you switch to a left-handed quarterback, because there's still the reality of, is a lot of teams are still going to put their best pass rushers on the side of the front side of the left-handed quarterback. And so in certain, depending on your schedule and the league you play in, there's still value to having your best pass blocker at left tackle, even if you have a left-handed quarterback. At least to having a conversation about that. But I mean, to me, when you talk about a left-handed quarterback, I don't know that there's any necessarily scheme adjustments that you change just because a guy's left-handed. I mean, you're still going to be boundary-oriented in your run game if you're boundary-oriented in your run game. You're still going to be a team that runs certain concepts if you are. I mean, how many times do we complain about, why does Notre Dame have their flipping quarterback sprint out to the left as often as they do? Well, now it's more natural, but now it's, why are they keep asking Deuce Knight to sprint out running to his right? You know what I mean? It's just, that's what coaches do. I don't think there's necessarily a ton of changes to that. The biggest thing is just your receiving core getting used to the ball coming out differently. I mean, like, I don't know that if you would have replaced, like, switched Bo Nix and Michael Penix, and have Michael Penix go to Oregon and Bo Nix go to Washington, that any of the changes that they would have made to suit Bo Nix would have not been geared towards his right-handedness. They would have been geared towards his style of play. And then vice versa at Oregon. It would have been like, well, we can't run the same offense we ran with Bo Nix because it's a different type of player. And so I think that has more to do with it than anything else. I think, to your point, Rob, the right tackle, left tackle conversation is really the only one that I can think of that really requires anything different with a left-handed quarterback. I mean, you're still, quarterbacks still have to throw right and left and over the middle, no matter whether they're right-handed or left-handed. I think there's certain situations where having a quarterback that's a right or left-handed guy may benefit you based on play calls in a certain situation, but it's more about the circumstances of the game. The ball just happened to be there. Thank goodness we have a left-handed quarterback, as opposed to, let's do this. And then there's other times too where you may set up a play to try to get on a different hash because of who your quarterback is, but those are not necessarily any, and those are true in other circumstances as well, right? I mean, those are true because we have a quarterback that likes throwing this route this way or whatever the case may be. So I don't think it has the big difference that maybe a lot of us think it does. I think it's just getting used to the ball spinning different. That's really the biggest thing. And again, it's kind of like you also it's not just the ball spinning different, but finding the ball is different. I mean, there's a reason why some left-handed hitters struggle to hit left-handed pitchers, because they're just so not used to growing up their entire lives seeing the ball come out that way from that angle. Where you don't see right-handed hitters struggle with right-handed hitters as much as at least when I was growing up, as much as you see lefties struggling with lefties. Why? Because when you grow up playing baseball and you're a right-handed hitter, you're mostly facing right-handed pitchers. When you're a left-handed hitter, you don't face left-handed pitchers as much. So, it's also about the balls come from a completely different side of the body for Michael Penix as it is for Bo Nix. But that's all stuff that gets worked out in spring ball and summer workouts. And by the time you get to the fall, it is what it is. It really is.
I think obviously the tackle conversation you're talking about, Rob, even though I think that's even getting a little overblown, because I think that the margin between a left tackle and a right tackle is a lot different than what it used to be, style of play wise. I mean, it's hard to get away with just a mauling presence at right tackle in today's game when there's so much passing emphasis nowadays. So right tackles need to be really good pass protectors as well. But I think that the biggest thing is, you mentioned preference of which way you're going to roll out. Sure. I think the other part of it is, if you're running a lot of RPO, if I'm a left-handed quarterback, I would think I would want to run a little bit more RPO to my right, so I don't have to completely, redo my stance and kind of have to get my body realigned. Your body's kind of already aligned off of that RPO action to the right. To the left, you have to ride it, and then you have to kind of contort your body to be able to get yourself in the proper throwing position, so you're not throwing against your body type of thing. But otherwise, I don't think it'll be a massive issue. I think that those are things that you, every single day in practice, from spring ball to fall practice and everything in between, that's stuff you're working on. We had a question for Pete Weber. Thank you, Pete. Which former college football player from another team would you have loved to see in a Notre Dame uniform? I always come back to Luke Kuechly, because I know Luke Kuechly actually had interest in Notre Dame, and Luke Kuechly was Luke Kuechly is my favorite NFL player of all time, but also Boston College.
I didn't know that.
Pretty ridiculous. Oh yeah, man, I'm a big
I didn't
Luke
know
Kuechly
that.
fan. Yep.
Why? Like, how did that come about?
I loved him at Boston College, and then he went to the Carolina Panthers. I just thought he was a great player, just fantastic player, and he was very non-assuming, very humble. Kind of had that Clark Kent look to him with the glasses and everything. Just love the kid, love the guy.
Interesting. I did know that. Learned something new today. Luke Kuechly's a good one, just because I keep thinking about how fun it would have been to watch him and Manti play side by side. That'd have been fun. I'll take this to my grave. If you could say at any point in Notre Dame's history, you could take one player that was in college football that season and move him to that Notre Dame team from that season. So not like I would love to put, Tony Rice on whatever other, or Rocket on the 2015 team. Just a player from the season that you could just switch him from that team to that team. I still say it's Lamar Jackson in 2017. Could you imagine Notre Dame in 2017? And all due respect to Brandon Wimbush, who was a heck of a runner that year, Lamar Jackson still doubled him up rushing yards that season, Ryan. Right. But Lamar Jackson was such a superior passer to Brandon. Could you imagine if 2017 Lamar Jackson got to play on that Notre Dame team with that run game, with that offensive line, with that defense? That team would have been scary good. I think that team could have won a championship. I really do.
Lamar's a freak. Lamar's a freak.
Yeah.
Probably the greatest running quarterback we've ever seen, right? Like, I mean, he's in the
Right.
conversation,
Well,
right? So,
I mean, the year I'm talking about, Ryan, okay, Lamar Jackson, Brandon Wimbush set a Notre Dame record with 14 rushing touchdowns, had over 800 passing yards. Like Brandon was a legitimate dynamic playmaker for Notre Dame that year. I mean,
yeah.
he was. I mean, there's no debating that. But Brandon Wimbush that year rushed for 803 yards, 5.7 yards per carry, and had 14 touchdowns. Lamar that same season had 1,601 yards, 6.9 yards per carry, and 18 touchdowns. But here's the difference. Brandon completed 49.5% of his passes for 1,870 yards, 16 touchdowns. Lamar that season, in which he rushed for 1,600 yards, passed for 3,660 yards, completed 59.1% of his passes, and threw for 27 touchdowns.
Yep.
So yes, you are correct, Ryan. He was one of the most dynamic running quarterbacks we've ever seen, if not the most dynamic. But this was a kid who had back-to-back seasons of over 3,500 passing yards, which is what would have made him such a crazy weapon in the Notre Dame offense in 2017. So if I could take one player from any team and move him from that team to the current year, having Lamar Jackson with Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, Alex Bars, Sam Mustipher, the right tackle duo they had with Josh Adams, Dexter Williams, Tony Jones, with Equanimity St. Brown at tight, because I was actually watching some 2017 film. You had 3 NFL players at tight end, actually 4 NFL players on tight end on that team, and Durham Smythe, Alize Mack, Cole Kmet, and Brock Wright. You also had Nick Wisher on that team. You had an NFL wide receiver on that team in Equanimity St. Brown. I guarantee you that you would have seen Chase Claypool playing a lot earlier because you would have wanted to get a blocker on the field, Lamar at quarterback. So we would have seen him early in the season as opposed to Freddie Canteen. Could you imagine that, though? Because Chase took over as the starting slot at some point in time that year. Could you imagine that team with Equanimity St. Brown, Chase Claypool, Durham Smythe, Alize Mack, that offensive line, Josh Adams, Dexter Williams, Tony Jones with Lamar Jackson at quarterback on that 2017 team? Oh, my gosh. Notre Dame has a title. I mean, that's why that's the one that I always point to. I don't see how anybody beats that Notre Dame team that year. Georgia was the national runners-up that year. Notre Dame was every bit as good as Georgia when they played, and that wasn't even the best version of Notre Dame we saw that year. So that team would have been really freaking good. Really freaking good. There's no doubt about that. Even with the same play caller, nothing. That's the thing. Nothing else has to change. Nothing else has to change. Just that. And I don't know how you
BK
beat
still would
that
have lost in the big game. Brian Kelly still lost in the big game, though.
But I just feel like Lamar's would have been good enough to overcome that. Like I get what you're saying, and I love it, Ryan. But that's the thing is I feel like Lamar would have been BK proof. You know what I mean? Like he'd have been BK proof.
Yeah.
No
Until
faith.
forget it. No comment. Okay. Zero comment. All the smoke. Nice name. Do you think Notre Dame finally gets a 1,000-yard wide receiver this year?
It's possible, but I wouldn't bet on it.
I'd say no.
Yeah.
I'd say that they are a lot more productive than they were last year, without a doubt. They have more consistency across the board from a player-to-player perspective and higher production from a player-to-player perspective. But I'd say the leading receiver maybe tops out at like 700-800 yards, just because there's a lot of mouths to feed, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, because again, my answer, it's possible, but I wouldn't bet on it. Because let's say Chris Mitchell's as good as we think he's going to be. Okay, he might get to 1,000 yards. Let's say Jaden Greathouse becomes the everyday slot and is just every bit as good as we think he's going to be. Yeah, maybe he gets to 1,000 yards. I mean, you could do this with a lot of different players, but the problem is you've got to share the ball with him. You've got to share the ball with Chris Mitchell, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, Jaden Thomas, Bo Collins, Deion Colsey, Jaden Harrison, Cam Williams. And oh, by the way, have we even mentioned any of the tight ends or running backs yet? I mean, your best returning pass catcher is Mitchell Evans, who has a chance, if healthy, to be one of the 5 best tight ends in college football this year. And so I just, to your point, Ryan, and Notre Dame's not going to throw the ball enough, in my opinion, to be a 4,000+ yard passing team to where you can spread the ball around as much as I think it's going to spread it around and a guy get 1,000 yards. Now here's the exception. If Notre Dame makes a deep run, then I could see it. Like if Notre Dame makes a run to the semifinal this year, that's 15 games. Maybe then, to your point, Ryan, because then it's like, 15, if you're talking about playing 15 games, to get to 1,000 yards, that's only averaging 66.7 receiving yards per game. But if we're talking like regular season +1, like normal, it's going to be a whole lot tougher. It's just because they're also going to run the ball really a lot this year too. And they're not going to be the kind of up-tempo team, in my opinion, that is going to put up the kind of yards that like here's the thing. I don't expect Notre Dame to replicate what LSU did on offense this year in a lot of different ways. Maybe points wise, but I don't see Notre Dame going for 8.4 yards per play. It was just a bit of an anomaly season, in my opinion. And you just look at like numbers over the course of the season. And the other thing too, to your point, Ryan, is LSU only had 6 guys with over 100 yards receiving this year. That's it. So the ball was not being spread around beyond 4 guys. Chris Hilton had the occasional plays, but I mean, you had 4 guys with over 300 yards. You had 3 guys with over 500 yards, and that was pretty much where all the throws went. Kyron Lacey was their number 4 receiver with 30 catches. The next closest guy was 14, and he was a running back. The ball wasn't being spread around as much because you had dynamic weapons at the top. Didn't need to be spread around as much. Notre Dame is going to spread the ball around more because they don't have a Malik Neighbors. They don't have a Brian Thomas at wide receiver. And I don't know that Mitchell Evans is going to be the kind of producer that's a 1,000-yard type tight end. That's just, you don't see that very often.
That's rare.
You just don't. Yeah. And I don't know that he's the type that would be that type of weapon, in my opinion, either.
I mean, Brock Bowers and Kyle Pitts are 2 of the more dynamic pass catching tight ends we've seen in recent years, but neither one of them had ever had 1,000 yards in a season. Like that's a crazy number. Crazy number.
Nor was Brock even on pace for that with the injury this year. I mean, it's not like if Brock doesn't get hurt, he might have been there. It wasn't. I mean, last year, Ryan, Brock Bowers, the only tight end that got close to 1,000 yards in 2022 is a guy that you would say is not a tight end, and that's Rondé Gatson because he's not used like a tight end. The next closest was Dalton Kincaid at 890, and then Michael Mayer had 809. And Brock Bowers had 942 in 15 games.
Yeah.
So to your point, it's just not conducive to that type of production. Actually, there is one that I wanted to look at, Ryan, because I can't remember what his numbers were.
Trey McBride had 1,000 yards a couple years ago at Colorado
State.
Yeah,
that's group of 5. I was trying to find where Pitts was because he played in that COVID year, and I'm trying to remember what his numbers.
This was only like 7 something, I think.
Yeah,
I think it was only like 7 something.
Yeah, 43 catches for 770 yards in only 8 games. So if he'd have played 12 games, he'd have been over 1,000 yards, probably. But to your point, Ryan, he is not really. I mean, he's a tight end, but he's not really a tight end in the way that Notre Dame has a tight end. He's a tight end.
Mitchell Evans don't have anything in comparison.
Nothing.
There's nothing about them that are similar.
Nothing. Let me ask you this, Ryan. If I were to say this, Ryan, I looked into the future and Notre Dame has a 1,000-yard receiver this year, you have to guess who it was. What would be your first 2 guesses?
Chris Mitchell and Jaden Greathouse would be my 2.
Yeah, be mine.
Yeah.
Bo Collins is a guy that I would say is a dark horse. I've said this before, I just have always liked Bo Collins. I've always felt he was in the wrong offense. I have. And I think but the problem is he going to play enough snaps in the boundary to be a 1,000-yard guy, even if I'm right about him as a player? You know what I mean? Like, even if I'm just dead on, spot on about him, you still have to play Deion Colsey. You still have to get Jaden Thomas some snaps there. I mean, you can't just play him at every single snap because there's just other guys that you just have to play. They're just too good not to help you.
Yep.
Good question.
We had Salty with another one.
He said, finally, Notre Dame's had 1,000-yard receivers not that long ago. I mean, Chase Claypool did it in 2019, and Will Fuller had back-to-back years. I mean, so they've had some. It's not like they haven't had any.
We've been starving for wide receiver production. I mean, whether they've had one 100-yard receiver in a game in the last 2 years, right, or whatever the heck it was.
So Rico was the first one against, what was it, Wake? Something like that.
And then Faison had it in the bowl game or whatever, but Salty with a question. Bill O'Brien is the next BC coach. How likely is it that Al Washington will be offered and accept the BC defensive coordinator job? Should Tommy Rees pursue the Ohio State offensive coordinator job?
I mean, should he pursue it? Probably. Would he get it? I doubt it. For me, the thing with Al Washington is this: there's a couple ways of looking at it. Number one is I think if I think it would be wise to consider Al Washington for the defensive coordinator job if you're Bill O'Brien. Number one, you have a guy that's coached at the school, a guy that's played at the school, a guy that's going to have passion for the school. I think a guy that knows how to recruit to that school, recruit to that level. He's a guy that was going to bring some name recognition as a recruiter. Came from Notre Dame, was considered a top assistant when he was at Ohio State from a recruiting standpoint. I think the year before he got to Notre Dame was named one of the top 25 recruiters in college football. So, and again, a guy that played and coached at BC. So I think there'd be some merit to that. I think it would be smart to do that. The counter offer is, are you really going to offer the job to a guy that was a finalist for the head coaching job? That's really the question that I have, is whether or not he'd be one to do that. Does Bill O'Brien have the thought process of, hey, I don't care that this guy was the runner up for the job. I'm gonna go after him. And for me, if you were willing to do that, I don't. Washington doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that's going to come there and try to undermine you. I don't. He doesn't strike me as that kind of guy who's going to say I should have got the head coaching job, and even though I'm the DC now, I'm going to do things to stab this guy in the back and under. I don't think Al Washington's that. He's never struck me as that kind of. I could be wrong, but he's never struck me as that kind of guy. As far as Tommy Rees, I mean, to me, should he pursue it? It depends on what his goals are. I've said this. I initially said he should. Sure, he should. Actually, I'm going to change my mind because Tommy Rees wants to be an offensive coordinator in the NFL. I think that's what his goals are. I've always been on the impression that he wants to coach in the NFL. And if that were true, and um, I don't know. I don't know if that would make sense for him. Having said that, I don't think Ohio State had any interest in him, and the name that we're hearing today, as far as who the next guy is going to be, it's there's people reporting it's going to be Chip Kelly, and I think that would make a lot more sense. And I'll have some thoughts on that if it becomes official, but I don't know that would make a lot of sense for Tommy if he wants to be an NFL coach, which I think he does. He wants to be an NFL coach. IC05, happy Friday, IB. What's more likely to happen first? Notre Dame winning a national championship or the Detroit Lions winning a Super Bowl? Boy, that's a good question. I mean, right now the Lions are closer to it than Notre Dame is. We'll see what kind of offseason the Lions have, but I think they're closer to it than Notre Dame is. The problem is the NFL is just with few exceptions, there's just short windows for a lot of these teams. And the Chiefs have been able to create some continuity. The 49ers have been able to create some continuity. The Ravens, to a degree, have been able to create some continuity. But every other year, there's new teams coming in and out. The Lions came out of nowhere. The Rams have been great one year, bad the next, and just not be able to create the continuity there. So who knows where the Lions will be in 2 years? We know they were pretty good this year. They should be pretty set to be pretty good next year. But in 2 years, they could be terrible again. That's just the life of being in the NFL. So Notre Dame, to me, has a chance to have better sustainability. If I had to bet on those two, I'd probably bet on, right now, I'd probably bet on the Lions right now, simply because I think they're closer right now. But if the Lions don't win in the next year or two, gosh, they were in the NFC Championship game up, like 21-6 or something like that at halftime. They were dominating that game and then just collapsed in the second half. So we'll see kind of how they bounce back from that. That could be the other thing is, how they handle that mentally is going to go a long way towards determining if they can build on this season or if it just becomes a one-off. That's the problem, is in the NFL, you don't know what's going to be one-offs and what's going to be like real sustained growth. There's just not as much consistency. YouTube Salty Virginia Peanuts says the Irish have offered Midwest City athlete Tristan Haynes. The Irish want him at cornerback, others at different positions. His offer list is A level. Will he be Irish? That's way too early for that one, Salty. Let's see if he makes a visit on campus yet. Ryan has had 2 stories out about him. One today talked about how Notre Dame has been on him for a while, but until he gets on campus, we shouldn't be having conversations about whether or not he's going to end up at Notre Dame. They got to get him on campus first, in my opinion.
And we had a question from John A1 who says, how did the 2024 Edge signees compare to Isaiah Foskey as high school prospects? I remember seeing Isaiah Foskey coming to De La Salle, just like the highlights, Brian, but like I didn't evaluate him, obviously. I know he was a guy that I think some liked the tight ends, some liked the
Early,
defense
yeah,
side of the
that's
ball.
partly why Notre Dame got him. They were one of the first schools
Yep.
that was really pushing for him to be a defensive lineman. Everybody
Yep.
else is kind of looking at him as a tight end at De La Salle, but you could see, Ryan, you could see if you would have evaluated him, you would have not been at all surprised by what he became. I loved Isaiah Foskey coming out. He was 6'5", long arms, athletic. He just was raw, little
Yep.
tight, but just raw, and a guy that was playing both ways, and a guy that they just kind of just came off the line and just was part of a system. At De La Salle, it wasn't like a turn him loose kind of guy. But you
Yep.
kind of saw a guy that was a pretty good high school tight end because he was so big and athletic that was still pretty raw as a defensive player. But the tools, 6'5", long arms, twitchy, strong hands. The tools were all there. I loved Isaiah Foskey coming out of high school. I'm not at all surprised he was what he was. And I'm sure you'd have felt the same exact way.
Sounds
Do any of
sounds
the
like comparing to
yeah,
the 2024 class, it sounds like you just kind of described Bryce Young a little bit. So it
that
sounds like
that that's exactly
physically,
right.
maybe there's some comparison there. So
Yeah. Because I think you and I would have agreed on this in the past. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but you and I have said in the past, in a perfect world, the way that Notre Dame plays defense, Isaiah Foskey's playing the field end position, the defensive end position, and not Viper. I mean, if you think
yeah,
about if you could have had Isaiah Foskey doing what Javante Jean-Baptiste did,
sure.
like that's a pretty good football player. He played Viper because that's the position they needed him to play, and he could play it. I mean, he could play it well. I just think he could have been even more dominant as part of the bigger picture if he could have been playing that position. And you had what you hope Josh Burnham could have been, or what you hope a Keon Keeley or somebody like that type of player could have been in the Viper position and have him play that. So I think Bryce Young absolutely is the guy that most compares to Isaiah Foskey and has
Yeah.
more God-given ability than Isaiah did coming out of high school, in my opinion. He's even more explosive. He's even bigger. He's as big now as Isaiah was as basically a sophomore going to his junior year of college. As
Yeah.
far as just like, I mean, you just look at him and you're like, dude, he just looks just like him.
I,
He does.
I think Bryce is probably a little bit more bendy than what Isaiah
Yes.
was too. Like Isaiah
Yep.
was super explosive and long, but like I wouldn't say he was the most bendy player of all time.
No.
Like he wasn't a guy that was just going to work outside track and bend his arc to the quarterback. Like that wasn't his style. He was more,
Right.
I'm going to beat you to the outfield shoulder. I'm super longer than you, and I can beat you out on the outside track because I'm just faster than you are.
Right.
So
And what was his great move? I mean, he would just get that inside
long
arm,
arm.
get you and just come off and drive you off and then come off and get to the quarterback. Well, that didn't work a whole lot for Isaiah in the NFL this past year, did it? Because you got to
No.
have more than that when you're playing against NFL offensive linemen that are just as long as you are. And that's why
Yep.
Isaiah struggled at Notre Dame against some of the better offensive lines. I mean, he struggled against Ohio State in 2022
Yep.
because he could just get away with that.
Yep.
And to your point, I think Bryce is a more explosive athlete. He's a better all around athlete than Isaiah was. But Isaiah as a big end, I think could have been a really good player at Notre Dame. There's
Yep.
no doubt about that. But you know, Chris Burgess is not like him as a player. He's a different type of player. I think I'd say that Chris is a little bit closer to Isaiah coming out of high school than Bryce was, because Chris is still about for projectability than just right now great player like you see it. And that's how Isaiah was coming out as a player as well, right? It was like he was going to need a year to learn the game and all that kind of stuff. Where I think Bryce showed me enough this year where you're like, that guy can get in the rotation in some capacity as a freshman. He still has a lot
Yep.
to learn, but he's a guy that can help you out right away. Isaiah, you knew was going to need time, a little bit of
Yep.
time.
We had another question from John A1. It says, at Notre Dame, how often do the top 5 rated recruits per class pan out? In the 2018 and 2021 classes come to mind as a bust. When a class busts, is it more on coaching evaluations or coaching development?
It's a little bit of both, but I think the issue with Notre Dame has more often been about development
Yeah. What was 2021? The Tyler Buckner, Lorenzo Styles class? That's the 21
yeah,
class? Yeah.
Deion
Yeah.
Colsey. I mean, but
Yep.
that class, I mean, to me, that class was far, far from a I mean, when you got Joe Alt as part of your class and Blake Fisher, I mean, you're gonna have 2 offensive tackles from that class that got drafted. I don't know that I would call it a bust
I,
of a
I think
class.
he's just talking about like the top group,
Yeah,
not as much like the whole entirety of the class, I
but
guess, is
like,
kind of what I'm saying.
yeah, perhaps. I mean, who are the top 5 guys from that class? I think the other thing too is we're assuming like so you had Blake Fisher, Lorenzo Styles, Tyler Buckner, Gabriel Rubio, Rocco Spindler were probably the top 5 from that class, depending on who you talk to. Other people would have Prince Collie in the top 5 of that class, Audric Estime in that class. So, I mean, to me, like with Tyler Buckner, it was neither. It was not a bad coaching evaluation. It was not bad development. It was bad luck. The kid just battled injuries. I mean, I think the kid had talent. Lorenzo Styles, bad development, not the right attitude. So, I mean, it's different with different players. Rocco Spindler, I mean, I wouldn't call Rocco a bust. I mean, as a redshirt sophomore, he was stepping into the starting lineup and had some good moments and got hurt. 2018 was a bigger bust year for me than 2021 with the top because 2018 you had like Phil Dracovic was a bust for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
You had other guys like Houston Griffith and Derek Allen, guys that just didn't pan out. Kevin Austin didn't really pan out to his last year. He didn't do anything until his last year. So you had a lot of that. Yeah. And I think Notre Dame is actually, this is a gut reaction, John. I could be wrong by the data, but I felt like Notre Dame's higher ranked recruits have often not panned out. I mean, I think one year, one of their top 5 recruits, I think was like Darnell Ewell. My dad was asking about him the other day, and you're
Pretty
just
sure,
like,
man.
yeah. And you're like,
He's
my dad said,
first man off the bus type of dude,
oh,
Darnell Ewell.
yes. My dad was like, why don't you think he panned out? Did Notre Dame miss on that evaluation? I was like, I don't think they missed on the evaluation. I just think it was one of those things where, the kid came to Notre Dame and just didn't put in the work and didn't have the right mentality, I believe he fathered a child as a freshman, from someone back home. And I just think there was just a lot of things that went into it where you're just like, it was just not the right fit, and he didn't do the work he needed to do to become the kind of football player you need to be. Was that a bad evaluation? Maybe,
Yeah.
but like, who was the top ranked recruit in that class? It was Brock Wright. Was Brock Wright a bad evaluation? No. Was it bad development? No. It's just other guys were just better. Cole Kmet was just
Yeah.
better. Cole Kmet, according to Rivals, was the number 2 player in that class, I believe, for Notre Dame. But I think there's been a lot of years where Notre Dame has had that. Where some of their top guys just didn't pan out for one reason or another.
Yeah.
From
Fortunately, it seems like
recruiting rankings
quarterback is
standpoint.
one that it's not been good for development at Notre Dame, which we all know that. It's not breaking
Yeah.
news, but
Yeah, I've had people say like Notre Dame does not evaluate quarterbacks, and again, I just don't agree because even at Boston College after that first year, Phil Dracovic looked like he was going to be a hit, and he
yeah.
really did. And then he just didn't have what it took in a lot of
I think
different
it
ways.
was
Physically,
personality deficiencies there is
yes,
what I would say.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
The you needing to have that mental toughness to work through some stuff that he just struggled to do, and then his body broke down too. He just couldn't stay healthy. But I mean, there were people projecting him to be the first round pick after 2020. He just
Yeah.
couldn't. He couldn't take that jump because it's
I had a third round grade on him going into that after that first year at
yeah,
Boston College. So I liked a lot of what I
yeah,
saw from Jerko that first year. But
well,
yeah,
yeah. But there's some things you can't evaluate on film until they get into the heat gets really turned up, and then you find it out.
agreed. We had Jeff Fluke with a question. It says, "Do you think our offensive blocking scheme fits the guys we have? What scheme would you use?"
Not what they did in
Like full.
2023. Yeah, I mean they tried to do a lot of pin and pull stuff this year, and I never understood why. Like you talk about, did I have a problem with Notre Dame running the play they ran late in the Ohio State game? Not as much as I had a problem with the direction that they ran it. You're asking Pat Coogan to pull and kick out JT, who is a money player for Ohio State and a way better athlete. I mean, you're asking for like a disaster. Like that was why ask him to do that? Why are you asking Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan to be pin and pull guys all game long? That just makes no sense to me. Why are you asking Zeke Corral to do that? So I felt this year they did not have a blocking scheme. Early on in the season, they did. They ran a lot more inside zone and duo early in the year, and their run game was better. And then they went to this pin and pull stuff all game long. And what they do in the bowl game, Ryan, in the last 3 games of the season, including the bowl game, what did they do? When they inserted the 2 young players, Shrouth and Craig, they went back to being more duo inside zone related because it's easier for young linemen to learn, and the run game went back to looking like it did early in the season in the last 2 games against Stanford and Oregon State. It's not a coincidence, right? Now, the good news is in 2024, Mike Denbrock is a inside zone lover. He is, always has been. He did it at Notre Dame. He did it at Cincinnati. He does it at LSU. And so, as I talked about this yesterday, Ryan. So I'll let you carry on more if you want. But simply put, you need to have some pin and pull concepts and some zone concepts in your run game. The question for coaches is, what are you going to major on and what are you going to minor on? And to me, Notre Dame, with the personnel they have, plus who Mike Denbrock is, you're going to see them major on the zones and then minor on the counters, the pin and pulls, and the stuff like that, which is totally fine. That's what they did in 2017. Notre Dame was an inside zone based team, but they would gash you with G scheme and buck sweep because it was a wrinkle. It was something that you're coming here, and then boom, they pin and pull and get outside of it. And it worked because it was a minor off of the major, and how teams defended the major allowed you to open up. But they had guys that could Alex Bars could get out and move in space a lot better than Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan could. That's why it was effective. And so could obviously Quentin Nelson. So I think you're going to see them getting back to majoring in the zones and minoring in that other stuff, which is going to make them a better run game. Because I think they have the backs for it, and I think they have the offensive line personnel for it. Because we're talking about how big they're going to be, Ryan. I mean, I think they're going to be more athletic next year than they were inside. But I still think this is a team that Billy Shrouth is going to be at his best when he's just coming off and popping you in the mouth, in my opinion. And yes, he can pin and pull and all that kind of stuff, but I want him playing power football. I want Charles Jagasaw playing power football. I want Ashton Craig and Pat Coogan to play power football, not pinning and pulling all day. It's just who they are, in my opinion. And I think Joe Rudolph was able to have some success with that stuff at Wisconsin because, let's be honest, there wasn't as much speed on defense in the Big Ten when they were really thriving. You can kind of get away with some of that stuff. I think they need to get back to majoring in the zones. And the good news is the new offensive coordinator is someone who is a believer in building your run game around the inside zone and all the wrinkles. I mean, lock zone, inside zone, split flow zone, read zone, all of it's going to be all brought back in this season. And you'll still see some duo and some counter and some pin and pull stuff too, but it's going to be inside zone is going to be the day one install thing, I believe, under Mike Denbrock.
Yep. And I think it should be. I mean, to your point, I think that you luckily have running backs that I think can do a little bit of everything, which is a great thing to have. I mean, I think that getting Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price on the edge at times and some pin and pull stuff, some buck sweep stuff, like that would be great and very advantageous. But I think overall, getting them downhill and working from the first to second level to opening is where you mostly want to get there, right? So, and I also think that the one thing about the offensive line is the offensive line is going to be very inexperienced this year. And, just letting Billy Shrouth stay in his mindset of being aggressive, coming off the ball, being physical, getting downhill is advantageous. I think the same thing can be said for Charles Jagasaw, even though Tosh Baker, if he's a starting right tackle, even though he's played some for Notre Dame and is a older player, he still is relatively inexperienced. I mean, he's only started a couple games in his career. So being able to just let him focus on being explosive, being aggressive, and really having that cohesive nature between him and the guard, I think could be very advantageous to this team. And then also, it's a lot easier off of the zone that we're talking about, the inside zone look, to get Riley Leonard involved in the run game a little bit, right? The pin and pull stuff, it's a little harder to be able to get that quarterback to be a rushing element or being a running threat. Off a zone read, it's very easy to potentially get him to keep it occasionally off the backside and be able to create an explosive play that way. So I think that is the baseline. I do think that you need to be diverse with your approach, though. I don't think it can be exclusive, obviously, of just one thing, because I do think you have running backs that can hit the edges, that can hit downhill. You have a very good balance of running backs. And last year, there was no question of who the number one running back was. I mean, it was Audric Estime, and Audric Estime was a great running back, but he's not a pin and pull outside runner all the time. Like you do it occasionally
Right.
off of a changeup. Like he's not a guy that's
Right.
going to exclusive run those types of things. So I think that you could be a little bit more diverse in your run game this year, just based upon the running backs you have, if nothing else. We had a next question from John A. Who says, is Preston Zinter a guy who can rise this spring while Drake Bowen plays baseball? Does Preston Zinter have the athletic ability to thrive in a similar fashion to J.D. Bertrand or Drew White, or is his potential greater? I think he has greater potential because I think he's got a better body than both those guys. And I think that athletically speaking, I mean, like JD and Drew White could both run pretty well. I mean, they're both 4'6" something athletes, right? But I think that Preston might be a little bit first step twitchier, a little bit more explosive in that first step. And I think that he has a bigger body. So, I mean, just to answer that second part, John, I do think that I would say Preston Zinter has a little bit more higher upside because also Preston, a guy with the length that he has, I think he could do a little bit more versatile things, right? Like you can put him on the edge at times to rush. You can utilize him as a blitzer, and I think he can get home a little bit more consistently than a JD Bertrand can, for instance, right? Because he has a little bit more length, athleticism, overall profile. So I think that he's a little bit more versatile, has a little bit higher upside. But as far as fighting for playing time this year, it's going to be an uphill battle, man. I mean, it's a deep linebacker room, but I do think that he has an upside to him. There's no doubt about that.
Ryan, the other thing that you'll see from him that I didn't see a ton on film because I used him, but I saw in some practices, his closing speed sideline to sideline is really good because he's a long athlete. And like that's the thing that I noticed on film because he struggled early on with the transition to Notre Dame, just getting used to everything. Like you could see he was swimming, dude. But when he knew what he was supposed to do, he looked really impressive doing it. And because like you said, he's got that first step explosiveness. He's 6'3", like a legit 6'3", and he's kind of long limbed a little bit. And that when he gets opening and running, he can really move. So I like Preston Zinter. I think he's got a chance, and he can help you in a lot of different places. I said this a million times, man. If you get into trouble at tight end, move Preston Zinter over there. He can play. You need another Viper, move Preston Zinter there. He can help you. So I think this is a kid that could do a lot of things for you as a football team, including playing linebacker for you as well. So he's a good football player. And could he? I mean, that's Drake Bowen's not going to miss as many practices as people think because of baseball.
Yeah.
I mean, they only practice 2 to 3 times a week for football, and you can still practice even if the baseball team's playing that day. I think the only Cole Kmet wouldn't practice when he was pitching that day. I mean, Drake's a little different because he's a position player, but I don't believe Drake is on position to start for Notre Dame this year. I don't think. So I don't think it's going to hurt. I don't think he's going to miss as many practices as we think. It's more so about, is he then going to be able to invest the off the field time needed to really grow as a player? That's my bigger concern than missing practice.
Drake's a corner outfielder, right? He's a corner outfielder.
I think they have him listed as an infielder on the roster. He played like shortstop in his last year, and I think he might be playing third base for them.
Okay, got it.
That's just what the roster said. I that just going off of that. I'm could be wrong on that, but I know the roster has him listed as an infielder.
Gotcha. Pete Weber with the super chat. Thank you so much, Pete. Another Mount Rushmore, but this time Notre Dame related. Who is on your Mount Rushmore of Notre Dame wide receivers after 2000?
Boy, oh boy. Michael Floyd has to be on there. It means this program's all-time leading receiver. You have to put Samardzija on there. You have to put Golden Tate on there, and I think you have to put Will Fuller on there. Yeah. I mean, I loved Mo Stovall in 2005, but he only had that 1 year. Or Samardzija did it for 2.
Or is this our personal Mount Rushmores where we're just saying our favorites? That changes it up a little bit, but yeah.
I mean, for me, it's both. Yeah, it's both. I mean,
I might cycle out. I don't know. I would like to get Maurice Stovall up there if I can, but yeah, I don't know. Just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I loved Mo, but for me, it's like he had that 1 year, that one great year. It was timing.
It was great.
Like if he could have played for multiple years, could you imagine if Mo came back in 06?
Yeah, with Reeman coming back.
Yeah, that'd have been fun to watch. But I mean, you've got your all-time leading receiver in Floyd. You've got a Biletnikoff winner in Golden Tate. You've got all the dynamic stuff that Will Fuller did, and then Samardzija. I mean, Like, there's guys I liked a lot, but that's got to be my 4 for me. That's got to be my 4. I mean, Rama had a pretty good year in 06 too, caught 15 touchdown passes that year,
Oh, yeah,
just
it was
under
very good that
1,000
year.
yards. Yeah. That catch, that catch he made for the touchdown against Michigan State in the rain. I mean, first of all, just Brady dropping that on the outside shoulder was nuts, but that's a hard ball to catch in a pouring rain against the corners they were going against. That was a heck of a catch.
Yeah. And that was they got a little bit of payback after losing to them in 05, right?
Yep.
They lost
Yeah,
to
because they
Michigan State
lost.
in 05.
Yeah, Michigan State jumped on them big in 05 at home. Notre Dame came back. They
Yep.
went to overtime and they lost. Same thing
Drew
happened in
Stanton, man.
06. Yeah.
Drew Stanton.
Same thing happened in 06. They got up big on Notre Dame. Notre Dame came back and were able to this time to win it. Yeah.
I used to have a soft spot for Drew Stanton, man. That dude was a tough dude at quarterback for Michigan State, man. I like Drew Stanton. I liked him a ton. We had another super chat from John A1. Thank you, John. In the next 5 years, what % chance does Notre Dame have of a player being the face of college football? Talking Tim Tebow, Reggie Bush, Vince Young, Marcus Mariota level guy.
Well,
Probably
that's a good one. I don't know that they have that, mainly because those guys were all considered that partly because they were great players, but also partly because they got the ESPN push. I don't know that ESPN's ever going to push a Notre Dame player that way and the way that they do it now, just simply because Notre Dame signed with a competitor. I mean, that's the reality of it. But who could be that guy? I mean, I think Deuce Knight has some of that personality. Yeah, where like I said this yesterday, Sean, when I was doing the show with Sean Ryan, is I think CJ Carr is the kind of guy that and Kenny Mincher, the kind of guys could just go out there and dominate, and then no one talks about them because they're just go out there and do their job. Where Deuce has kind of got a little bit more of that outgoing personality that maybe will make cameras be a little bit more. Because like I feel like when Kenny and CJ are getting interviewed, you walk away being like, "Boy, that's just a really smart kid," and then you just leave it at that, right? When you talk to Deuce, you're like, "That's a really smart kid," and holy crap, he's got tons of personality. You know what I mean? So like, that's part of it. Is let's be honest, all those guys had some level of charisma. Mariota a little less than the others, but all those guys had some level of personality that you kind of helped gravitate it as well. Like, does Jeremiah Love have that? Could he be maybe? Maybe he's a unique kid. He can maybe be dynamic enough and productive enough to be that kind of guy. Maybe. That's really it. I mean, it's the quarterbacks and running backs. I mean, that's
maybe
the position
Cam
that
Williams
those guys played.
if he's
Maybe,
that guy, I don't know.
maybe. But receivers don't ever really get that kind of love as far as being like face of college football. It's a quarterback, running back type of thing. I mean, that's even Devontae Smith, as good as he was in 2020, he wasn't the face of college football that year. I mean, he didn't get that same kind
Michael
of love.
Crabtree, man. Crabtree was that guy. Crabtree was that guy.
Well, he was a great player, but like even Michael, I mean, he wasn't a guy that was necessarily, you would say, I mean, why didn't he win the Heisman? Right? Because he didn't play quarterback. So, but yeah, he was so good. I still remember that touchdown catch he had to beat Texas. What was that? 08?
Yeah,
2000.
where he ran. Was it like the deep out where he broke the tackle right along the sideline, right, and scored?
Yep.
Him and Justin Blackman are probably two of the most absurd college receivers I've seen in like a 2-year span. It was nuts what those guys did.
He had 41 touchdowns in 2 years at Texas Tech.
It was wild, man. It was
ridiculous.
And I think Danny Amendola was on one of those teams, and it was just like Danny Amendola was just like a nobody, and he ended up being a good receiver in the NFL.
Right. But again, 07, 08, you weren't seeing Michael Crabtree, winning the Heisman. I'm actually going to go look and see, because I know I think 07 he was in the top 4 or 5.
Yep.
Nope. Not even, no. Or was it 08? I thought there was a year. Yeah, 08. He was number 5. Here's the stupid thing about it, Ryan. In 08, Michael Crabtree was 5th in Heisman Trophy voting, behind his quarterback, Graham Harrell. That year, Michael Crabtree had 97 catches for 1,165 yards and 19 touchdowns. That's pretty darn good, right? The year before in 07, he had 134 catches, 1,962 yards, and 22 touchdowns. He didn't even finish in the top 10. That's what I keep telling guys. It's a who are you award. You have to have some level of name recognition. The fact that a guy could catch 130 passes for almost 2,000 yards and 22 touchdowns at a Power 5 school and not even finish in the top 10 in voting, but the next year with 40 fewer catches, 800 fewer yards, finish in the top 5, tells you everything you need to know about. Exactly, because he was a name by then. Exactly. And that's why the Heisman just, it is what it is. But there's some guys that could maybe be that.
I wonder where Justin Blackmon finished that one year. There was one year where I'm pretty sure Justin Blackmon had 100 yards plus and a touchdown in every single game. I think that was his second to last year. It was just absurd.
So that'd have been 2010. He finished fifth.
Fifth? Okay.
Yeah, that was the year he had 111 catches for 1,782 yards and 20 touchdowns. The next year in 11, he had more catches, but about 260 fewer yards and a couple fewer touchdowns and did not finish in the top 10. Didn't he also get suspended for a game or something like that in 2011? If I remember correctly.
I just remember that kid was uncoverable, man. They do nothing with Justin Blackmon.
Yeah, he was very good. Very good. And that was back when Oklahoma State was just producing like big time producers at running back and wide receiver like every year, it seemed. It was wild. All right. Good questions. I'm enjoying these questions from all you guys today. Good, really good stuff. All right. Let's get some more super chats.
We had Richard Motts with a super chat. Thank you so much, Richard. With all the good old offensive line classes from 2023 and 2024, could there be a possibility to rotate players like the defensive line to keep players fresh? Would this disrupt things too much? I'm okay with like rotation at like one position potentially if there's two guys that are equal, Richard. But I do not want to do a lot of like rotating on the offensive line because that is just a position where it's about cohesion, man. It's about being used to the guy next to you. Like I'm not for that personally. Not for that.
I will say this, Ryan. I've advocated for there to be rotations at times. It's usually for a spot or two. There has to be structure to it. That's the thing. There has to be structure to it. There has to be a plan. You have to know, like the thing that worked so well about 2017 is Tommy Kramer and Robert Hainsey both knew exactly when they were going in the game. And it was every other series, unless it was 2 minute, then Robert was going in, or 4 minute, which is the one where you're going to run the clock out, then Tommy was going in. Like they knew exactly the plan every single week. And then that also means that Alex Bars knew what the plan was. He knew who was going to be beside him every series. Okay, here's who's beside me every series. It has to be something like that where you're getting that. Or what you could also do, Ryan, is you could, in that situation, you could actually have a substitution where your right guard and right tackle, for example, come in every 4 series. You sub that position, that side out, if it's unique enough. But again, continuity to the, and I think Richard Mott knows this from the question. Continuity is so important with offensive line play. It really is, because you have to play together. Like if you're a receiver, you have to know the other guy's route because it impacts your route, but you're not playing together the same way you are in the offensive line. And so I've got to know how this guy works. I got to be able to feel like people say, well, your offensive linemen communicate. They tell, but if you're trying to run inside zone in a 110,000 seat stadium and everybody's screaming, you may not hear that guy saying, I got it. It's a feel. I felt him. And then I knew I could go. That comes from reps with that guy. Yes. And it can be hard to get that reps if you're just constantly rotating guys in and out there. So unless you're going to do a very specific set rotation like they did in 2017, or if it's going to be like a side, then I don't think it can really work the way that it does on D-line and receiver and other positions. I don't think it can. But I think in certain situations you can make it work, but it has to be practice. It has to be, this is what we're doing, and we're just going with it, and this is exactly what we do, and everybody knows what's going on. And that's what made it work in 2017. And you won a Joe Moore Award with your right tackle position rotating every series. Yeah. But everybody knew exactly what the deal was and who was going to be on the field, and that's what made it work.
Yep. We had another one. Ida Benami, thank you so much for the super chat. We thought Golden Mickens might leave, and it could be Al Washington.
Maybe. There's another question here, Ryan, about it. It says, Michael S. says, thank you for super chat, by the way, Michael S., but chances of safety coach Chris O'Leary leaving for the NFL? I don't know. I mean, he got NFL interest last year. I'm sure he's getting NFL interest now. I've heard this team, that team. I think we spend too much time stressing over assistant coaches potentially leaving. And for me, there's really only one position coach that I look at and I say, gosh, I hope he doesn't leave. And that's Mike Mickens. Now, I don't want any of them to leave. I like continuity, but it's, you lost Chancey Stuckey, you replace him with somebody better. You lost Jared Parker, you replace him with somebody better. You lost Lance Taylor, you replace him with somebody better. I mean, that's you. If you have enough faith in the guy that hired all these guys to begin with, and yes, Marcus Freeman did hire Chris O'Leary because I was told at the time that that Brian Kelly was going to let Marcus Freeman decide who was going to be the safeties coach in 2021, and he picked Chris O'Leary. And so, to me, if Chris O'Leary leaves, okay, go replace him with somebody just as good or better. If Al Washington leaves because he's going to get the D coordinator job, your defensive line coach job just got that much more attractive because I can go to Notre Dame, do a good job for 2 years, and get a Power 5 D coordinator job. All right. And they're going to pay money too? All right. And I get a coach with Marcus Freeman? All right, cool. Let's do it. Bet. So I would say I just don't worry about that stuff, Ryan. I mean, if Chris O'Leary leaves, I don't want him to leave, but if he does, okay, they'll be fine. If Al Washington leaves, I don't want him to leave, but if he does, they'll be fine. And so that's why I haven't really paid a whole lot of attention to it. I don't know. I have no clue what they're going to do. And we won't know until they make a decision. But if they leave, they leave. And you replace them with somebody just as good or better. That's what Marcus Freeman will be tasked to doing. So if you have faith in Marcus Freeman, who hired these guys to begin with, then you should have faith that he'll be able to find their replacements. He didn't accidentally hire all these good coaches, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality.
It's a sign of a healthy program that we're talking about this each and every year.
Right.
I mean, it is. So if Al Washington gets the major Power 5 defensive coordinator position, it's a step up on the ladder. If Chris O'Leary gets a safety coach position in the NFL, that's a step up. I mean, ultimately. Yeah. So as long as they're not getting demotions and they're not leaving for lesser jobs, that's when you start worrying. Right. This is a rich man's problem right here, is that guys are getting promotions to other schools potentially.
Correct. That's a great way of putting it. Had a super chat from Will Falk. Will, thank you very, very, very much.
Andy Milton fan, what are some of the more frustrating Notre Dame recruitments you can recall, and why? Can be players that did or did not end up actually going to Notre Dame?
Well, I mean, it's hard for me to look past last year. I mean, that was the Peyton Bowen thing was one of the dumbest, most frustrating recruitments I've ever seen, because I've never seen a kid just so blatantly lie to people the way that Peyton, and I'm just flat out, I'll say it. He flat out lied to people right to their face. And because he was telling every school something completely different. So he was lying to somebody. Only one of those schools was getting the truth to being told to them. And even after he did the thing with Oregon, he was on the phone telling Notre Dame coaches, I made a mistake. I want to sign with you guys. And got right off the phone and told the Oklahoma coaches the same exact thing.
And talking to commits in the class for Notre Dame. And
yes. Just that was frustrating. That was most of the other recruitments, like Keon's recruitment was disappointing. It wasn't frustrating. He was very honest. This is what I'm doing. This is what I want to do. And he did it over the summer. It was okay. I'm not happy about it. It sucks for Notre Dame, but it wasn't frustrating. Peyton Bowens was frustrating because we're having to report what we're told. The family's telling us this. Notre Dame's telling us this. It matches. We have to report it. I don't know what else to tell you. And then
he just lied.
And he's lying.
He strung people along. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was frustrating. So, because you knew there had to be something more to it because of what all these Oklahoma people kept saying over and over. But it's guys, I don't know what to tell you. This is what the Notre Dame coaches are telling us because that's what Peyton is telling them. And this is what Peyton's side is telling us. They're telling us it's nothing to worry about. So I don't know what we're supposed to do. I mean, if we call them liars beforehand, then we look like jackholes and, how'd you call them liars and stuff, it's and then we get blamed. He picks Oklahoma. It's because you guys called him a liar. Well, he was, but so it's we just got to report what we're told. And then whatever happens, happens. And then, we talk about it afterwards. But that's the only one that I really felt is frustrating from that standpoint. There was a lot of frustrating recruitments in the Brian Kelly tenure just because you knew there was a lot of guys that could have got if Brian Kelly would have worked harder. That's as simple as that. Jalen McMillan probably is at Notre Dame if Brian Kelly worked harder. or had any desire to get on the trail. There's a lot of that.
If you don't want to be called a liar, then don't lie. That's
Right.
all I got to say about Peyton Bowen. All I got to say
Yes.
about Peyton Bowen. That's
Yeah.
it. I think my only frustration over the last couple cycles is like I wish Notre Dame would have pushed for a particular guy. Like maybe that's where my frustration spurs from.
Sure.
But yeah.
Yep.
We had Andy Milton fan. Another Brian Kelly question. What car best describes Brian Kelly and why? What type of car?
I don't know. Pick a car that's really flashy on the outside, but just a bunch of crap on the inside, and then that's Brian Kelly.
I will pick a Beetle because they're very small, little. Sure. I don't know. Don't have a good one. Sorry.
There you go.
Steve Rolfe with the super chat. What do you guys think of position changes? How do you gauge if a move was smart? What do you do if you move a guy to a spot and he's just a bad fit?
Well, I mean, you don't move them. And if you
Right.
do make that mistake, you fix it as quickly as possible. I mean, look, that's always going to happen. You're like, man, this kid's got some traits. I think he can play here. And then you move him. You're like, yeah, he doesn't have them. He doesn't. It's not natural to him. You know, you could look at a guy. This guy's 6'4". He moves with ease and he's fluid and he can jump. Let's move him to receiver. You move him over there and he says no feel for it, can't catch. And you're like, well, okay, we need to end this experiment pretty quickly. So if you ever make a move like that, Steve, just fix it, rectify it. Don't be that coach that's unwilling to admit, okay, this was a bad idea, and then just keep it along. So I'm all for position changes. I think that the only issue I have with position changes, besides what I just said, Ryan, is when you're moving a kid knowing he can't play for you there. You just need a body. I think that's very unfair to the kid unless you tell him that, hey, listen, you're not going to play here, but we got to have somebody that can give us some depth here. You know, just be honest about it. But I think that's the only time I have issues with position changes. Is like don't move Xavier Watts to defense and then not let him play. Like I hated that when they did that. Like, you know, it's like if you're going to move him, let him play. And then they eventually did, and it worked out. But yeah, just. And how do you gauge if a move was smart? I mean, the easy one is that, you know, okay, was it smart to move Xavier Watts' defense? Well, yeah, looking back now, it was. But if he doesn't pan out, does that mean it wasn't the right move at the time? Not necessarily. I mean, so it can be hard to evaluate that. You know what I mean? Because it still might have been the right move. It just didn't work out. That happens sometimes. You know, it does.
It usually comes down to a fundamental question. And my fundamental question would be very, very, very short on this one is, does making this move, this switch, this position change, make us a better football team? If the answer is yes, then it was a good decision. If it doesn't work out or not, it was still a good decision at the time. The next step will be worth of, you know, the full scope of everything. But I think that ultimately you try to put the player in the best possible circumstance individually, and you ask yourself what is best for the team, right? Like you can have a cloudy vision otherwise, but if you answer those two questions, hopefully with a yes on both sides, then it was a good decision ultimately. So yeah.
All right, we got one more super chat, and then we'll get back to the top here.
Michael S. with the super chat, thank you, sir. Says Chip Kelly to Ohio State. Your thoughts? They got better today with Chip Kelly as their offensive coordinator. Chip Kelly is one of the brighter offensive minds in college football and the NFL. Very smart guy, diverse run scheme that is very creative. And I have seen him win with different types of quarterbacks throughout his career, different types of running backs as well. I mean, he had Zach Charbonnet, who's a big physical back. He's had guys like LaMichael James, who is not at all a big physical back. So I think that Ohio State just got scarier offensively because they have a much better play caller in than they previously did. I mean, I think Bill O'Brien's a very quality, good play caller. Chip Kelly's better, just flat out,
and that's a better college play caller as well.
Yeah,
in my opinion, much better college play caller. And honestly, my only issue with this move is the dynamic between Ryan Day and Chip Kelly. If he lets Chip Kelly coach the offense, you just got better in two spots, Ryan. You got better as your OC, and your O-line coach just got better. Where did Justin Fry come from?
UCLA. Yep.
Right. Because him and Chip Kelly were a good pair. Ryan Day is a soft coach. His teams are soft on offense because he's soft, right? You and I would probably have some disagreements, Ryan, over the evaluation of him as a play caller. We both agree he's overrated to the degrees we would probably disagree on. But the one thing that I'll always agree with you on is he's soft, which makes his offense soft. And if he hadn't gone and hired Jim Knowles and just hired some other young defensive coordinator, they'd still be soft on defense as well. He at least made a smart hire there. He's going to hire himself into success because it requires the team to rely less and less on him and his personality. Yeah. If he lets Chip Kelly run this offense, they're going to get back to being physical and running the football, which is going to make them a more they're not going to maybe throw for as many yards as they have at times, but they're going to be a way better team. And this system will fit Will Howard way better than anything Ryan Day has ever done with that kind of quarterback. So if he lets him run the offense, I think this is a great hire for Ohio State. Yep. Now, the question is this is probably short term. This is probably for like a year, maybe two, because Chip's going to want to go. Chip wants out of UCLA because he knows they don't want him and he doesn't want them, right? I mean, he's done with that. He's going to be a head coach again probably soon somewhere. And so, but hey, if you're Ohio State, you don't care. It's like the Rams, right? I mean, look, you're all in for a title in 2024. That you're sacrificing everything else to try to win this year, to try to get back and win it, title, Big Ten. You got to beat Michigan. You got to make a run. You got to get back to people thinking you're Ohio State again. And I think this is a great hire. Some people in the chat talking about he's not a very good, he's a turd of a coach. I don't know what the heck you're talking about.
He's got a big ego. I mean, but
100%.
I think that's actually good though, because that means that Chip Kelly would not have come here if he wasn't going to be in charge of the offense. Yeah. I don't believe.
But here's the other thing too is I think the dynamic between Chip Kelly and Ryan Day is going to work because they already know each other. Remember, Ryan Day worked for Chip Kelly at New Hampshire. I'm pretty sure they coached together at New Hampshire.
Quarterback for him,
right? Sure when he was the OC at New Hampshire, I believe that was one of. Let me go look up Ryan Day's resume because I'm pretty sure that you could be correct about him also being a player there. He was a player from 98 to 2001. Yep. Yes. And Chip Kelly, I believe, was on the staff. Let me just look because I want to make sure that I get this right. He was at New Hampshire he was the OC from 99 to 2006. So he was his OC for 2 years. Ryan Day, well, actually, no, hold on, more than that. He was a player there from 98 to 2001. So he was all 4 years. He was the OC. For all but 1 year, he was the OC. The 1 year he wasn't the OC, he was the O-line coach. And then Ryan Day's first coaching job was in 2002 at New Hampshire under Chip Kelly. And because Chip Kelly didn't leave for Oregon until 2007. So I have to think that they both understand and have had converse because there is that long-term previous relationship. I have to think it's going to work. But we just need to see Ryan Day do it when, and not panic and change things. So to your point, the very first thing you said, this was Bill O'Brien leaving was a potentially really good thing for Ohio State, in my opinion. Replacing him with Chip Kelly makes that a very, very, very good thing. Because again, I think Chip Kelly's more of a college coach than Bill O'Brien. And I think that fits because when Ohio State won a title, Ryan, what were they? They were a team that ran the ball down your freaking throat. They were physical. They ran right at Bama, and they would run downhill, throw downhill, man. That's who they were. And the further and further away they've gotten away from Urban, the softer they've become. And it's because of Ryan Day. And I think Chip Kelly brings that back. And the O-line coach is someone that he knows and has worked with. So you're going to have a very smooth transition from a coaching standpoint up front as well. So he's going to have better talent at receiver than he ever had at UCLA and Oregon, in my opinion. So, this was if you're an Ohio State fan, I have to think you're pretty fired up today. I have to think that.
I also think that now Ryan Day can concentrate on the important things like trying to beat up Lou Holtz. It's going to be good for his time.
You really dislike Ryan Day, and I can't fault you for it.
He's a turd, man. He's an absolute turd.
I really can't fault you for it. I very much dislike him, and not just as a coach, but just as a guy. Not a fan. Not a fan. But yes, this was a smart hire. Very, very smart hire, in my opinion. All right.
We had Andy Milton fan. Has any Notre Dame player ever taken over a game as much by themselves as actually possible?
Sure. I mean, Jerron Jones against Miami in 2016, Jerry Tillery against Stanford in 2018. I don't know if you can have a defensive tackle performance better in just a game than what Jerry Tillery had against Stanford in 2018. Like,
Xavier
I think that
Watson to
game,
USC last year.
yeah, but would you say I think that game against Stanford made Jerry Tillery a first round draft pick? I do. I think that people look
Certainly
back at
helped his
that game and
case.
kept saying to themselves, "Boy, if we can get that, 6'7", 310, and he can move like that and have 4 sacks against Stanford and all this other kind of stuff." I mean, Rocket had some games he just flat out took over. I mean, Miami in 1990, Rocket kind of took that game over, runs, catches, kick return for a touchdown. Lou Samochi will tell you there was a lot of games Rocket took the second half of games over. So what they would do, Ryan, with Rocket is in 89 and especially 1990, they would basically wear you down with like Ricky Waters and all the other backs in the fourth quarter, put Rocket in the game and hand him the ball. And he's just so fast and you were so worn out that he just would rip you apart. I mean, there was a couple games. I'm trying to think which game it was. Brady Quinn had a couple games where you're just like, I don't know if you could play much better quarterback, at that time than what Brady did. No, especially 05. He was really, really good in 05.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen units. The Notre Dame
Yeah.
offensive line against BC in 2017 was ridiculous.
I mean, I know we're obviously trying to think of like times where they played probably against really good teams and took the game over. But like I would even see Aldrich Estime last year against Stanford. He took that game over.
Oh
Like
yeah, it's
he's
ridiculous.
debilitating for Stanford. They're just like, we can't stop Aldrich Estime. Like can't stop him.
Ridiculous.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Josh Adams against USC in 17 with the similar thing. Just
yeah.
running it just down their throat. So yeah, there's been some games like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think of some others.
Shinadem Ndukwe against Navy that one year where he had like
Oh, when he
24
had like
tackles.
20
Like,
some
it was.
tackles.
Like,
Oh, hey,
what?
here's another defensive one. Harrison Smith against Miami in 2010.
Yeah.
I mean, just picked him off 3 times in the first half, just completely changed that game. I mean, that was a phenomenal game from Harrison in 2010. So yeah, we've seen stuff like that before. Now, for a game, for a season, it's a little harder, but for a game, yeah, I think the Xavier Watson against USC one is a big one as well, Ryan. That was pretty good.
Killed him. Domer Grizz, happy Friday. Since the staff is intact and the 2024 signees buttoned up, what are Marcus Freeman's top 3 daily priorities between now and the start of spring practice?
Oh, say establishing culture. Obviously, that's one. Figuring out how to get the offense to play at championship caliber defense or caliber level, excuse me. What does that look like? What is your identity going to be this season? I think those are all parts of what the offseason is about. And third one, I mean, just right now it's about just figuring out what the actual, it's like right now, this time of the off season, we were talking about cooking last night, Ryan, because somebody said that you had said that you're by far the best cook that we have on the IB staff. So we had to address that.
Yeah.
I know. We were having some fun with that last night, but so you and I both like to cook is the point that I'm making. And so like when you like to cook, you're not someone who just follows recipes all the time. You like to expand. Let me try this. Let me try that. Let me see if no, that didn't work. Put that in my chili. That didn't work. This is that time of the year where some of that thought process is being worked out. Who's going to be where? What about maybe having this guy? And then you have that conversation. Yeah, no, that's not going to work. So there's a lot of that stuff is like, what is the actual makeup of your team going to be? Who's going to play where? What kind of, so there's a lot of that stuff. So just, you're really trying to figure out what the identity of this specific team is, because every team is going to be different in some ways. And that's a lot of what this time of the year is, honestly, for me, right? I mean, you could find 3, 4, 5 things just in that regard that you have to focus on right now. But it all revolves around culture and identity and who you want to be. If you don't establish that now, you don't start doing that in July. You don't do that in fall camp. If you haven't established who you are identity-wise or culture-wise by the time you get to the summer, you're just not going to be very strong in those areas, in my opinion. It starts
Yeah.
3 weeks ago.
Yep. Well, and Marcus Freeman's top 3 daily priorities, being a father right now. It's the off
Yep.
season, man. Being
Being a husband, being a
obviously,
father.
yeah,
Yes, that's a good
yeah.
one. Very
He's
good.
got a lot on his plate on a day-to-day perspective. I mean,
Yeah.
Domer, there's a lot that he does on a day-to-day perspective, man. Like I
Mhm.
know he's not coaching right now, but I mean it's a grind right now. It's an absolute
Yeah.
grind. So
Jason Smith just said, "I wonder if UCLA will regret doing Chip Kelly the way they did." Let me find out who they hire as his replacement, but I have a feeling, yes, UCLA is going to look back and be like, "Yeah, we were stupid." Yeah,
one thing that I'll say against Chip is that I think Chip did a good job at UCLA. I think Chip is a great offensive mind. I don't think he did a great job of putting a good roster together necessarily for the
at
long term. I
times,
mean,
yeah,
that
yeah, that's
roster right
fair.
now is bad, man.
That's
Like it's
fair.
not a good roster. It is not. So
That's
we'll
fair.
see, man.
And
We'll
how about
see.
all those Notre Dame kids that went to UCLA this offseason? I wonder how they're feeling right now.
Yeah.
That's another interesting one because you had Rico went there.
Mm-hmm.
You had I'm trying to think. They had 4 guys, I think, that either came right directly from Notre Dame or indirectly, like they had been at Notre Dame
KJ
in the
Wallace.
past.
KJ Wallace is there
I
too,
think
right? You
KJ
see
was
KJ
another
there?
one, right? Let me
Yeah.
just go to this here real quick. So commitments. Let's see here. All right. Let's see. Transfer commitments. So you had Rico Flores, you had KJ Wallace, Ramon Henderson, and Michael Carmody. That's who it was.
That's where
Those
Ramon
4.
Henderson is too now.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
He's a
Did not
Cali
know that.
kid. The
I
Carmody
forgot
one
he
is
was
the
there.
one that was the biggest surprise for me. I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. But yeah, they also got Brian Addison from Oregon.
I
So
like
yeah,
Addison a little bit,
yeah,
but yeah.
yeah. They got a kid from
And
Navy, kid from Yale. So yeah, got a
they,
long
they
snapper.
just
Not yeah,
they just don't recruit
bunch of
high
kids from Notre
school
Dame.
well at all, man, which is just not good.
No,
So yeah.
no, I do like the Quasi Gilmer kid. He's a pretty good player. But yeah, I look at these guys and I'm like, yeah, none of these guys are guys that should be at a place like Notre Dame. But I think he stopped recruiting like months ago because he like the
Yeah.
way that UCLA, like to me, there's a right and a wrong way to deal with a coach. And when a coach is in the middle of a winning season and you're dropping stuff about how you want to fire him, like, you know what, you deserve whatever crap comes your way. Like
Yeah.
that's the whole thing. It's like, yeah, there's things you could look at and say Chip Kelly need to do better here, need to do better there. He's not easy to get along with. I mean, anyone will tell you
Sure.
that. But again, there's a right way and a wrong way to go about it. And the way they went about it was wrong.
Whoever the next UCLA head coach is not going to be in the best position for the short term.
No.
Hopefully they can build for the long term.
Real quick note, Ryan. My dad just dropped a character that should be on the Mount Rushmore Hall of Fame. My dad said the
Okay.
character that Robert Duvall played in Open Range. It's one of my dad's favorite movies.
Never seen it.
So
Never seen
yeah,
it.
my favorite Robert Duvall character was, I don't know if you've ever seen this, was from Secondhand Lions. Have you ever seen that movie? It was him and Michael
Yeah.
Caine and Haley Joel Osment. It's very surprisingly a very good movie. Very
Okay.
well done. But yeah, my dad likes Open Range quite a bit. It's a little
Gotcha.
bit not a super older movie, but it's not recent.
Mm-hmm. John A1 says, since Marcus Freeman took over as the head coach, what position group has the staff upgraded the most in recruiting? Gotta be
Quarterback.
linebacker, right?
Quarterback.
Oh, okay, fair.
I mean, yeah, quarterback. Linebacking has been very good, Ryan, but
Yeah,
there have been stretches where Notre Dame has recruited the linebacker position pretty well. Defensively, I think you could debate whether it's linebacker or corner. It's one of those two, in my opinion. Linebacker and corner, to me. I think you could give the slight edge to linebacker because I think this year's linebacker class is so much better than the cornerback class, in my opinion. But in last year, I mean, you were great at both last year in 2023. You
yeah.
had Jaden and Drake and Preston, and then you also had Christian and Micah Bell at corner. 2022, you brought in Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey. Your linebacker class was also excellent with Jalen Sneed and Josh Burnham and Preston Zinner, Nolan Ziegler and June Chilomaka. So they've recruited them both pretty well, and they've been able to use the linebacker strength of recruiting to help out where they hadn't recruited very well previously, which was the defensive line position. You're able to move a couple guys there to help you out.
Sure.
And so, but yeah, this year there was a little separation at linebacker. in my opinion. I mean, I love Leonard Moore, but he's not as good as Kingston. And I think Bodie is definitely better than Carson, in my personal opinion. And then you have Teddy. Obviously, you bring in as your number 3. So, but yeah, that's debatable. Offensively, quarterback easily. They've upgraded the most since Marcus Williams got here, in my opinion. Like, yeah, it's fun. I think if you were to pick side of the ball, I said this last night, Ryan. I'm gonna ask you this now, and I'm curious if your answer is the same as mine. Which side of the ball has Notre Dame recruited better overall since Marcus Williams hired as the head football coach?
I like the 2023 defensive class better. I like the 2024 offensive class better. I don't know. I'll have to see what 2025 ends up looking like. I'm kind of split on that one. Kind of split.
I think it's offense for sure, because I do think you could argue that the 23 defensive class was better than the 23 offensive class.
Yeah,
but it's not it's not by as much as the offensive class in 24 is better than the 24 defensive class, in my opinion. And that's the difference for me. So I think they have definitely upgraded the offensive side. Now, I think the thing that you could say is that makes it to where I think we would definitely agree is which side of the ball, regardless of what they've recruited better, what side have they upgraded bet more compared to where they were recruiting previously. And I think that would, to me, would definitely be offense. What's interesting, though, is Notre Dame has recruited offense pretty well at times in the past. They just didn't develop it. I mean, people say, "Oh, we've never seen a receiver class like the last couple years." I'm like, "Yeah, we did. Look at 15 and 16. Those you had Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, Equanimity St. Brown, Kevin Stepherson, C.J. Sanders, Javon McKinley, Jalen Guyton, all in a 2-year span. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, they didn't do as much with those guys as they should have at different times, and so it was always about, can you get the most out of them? And that's what we're still waiting to find out.
Super chat from Sean S. Random question. Is there a running back in the past 25 years at Notre Dame you'd take over Julius Jones?
Is there a running back in the
25 years?
So that would go back to
99?
1998, 99? I mean, I don't know. Audric Estime was pretty freaking good this year.
I was going to say Audric Estime is a pretty good conversation. I don't know.
I mean, Julius was a great talent and a really good back, but I don't know that we ever saw the best of Julius Jones at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
For a couple reasons. Number one is, he did have the suspension where he missed a year. I mean, you can't discount that. And the other fact is he didn't play on great teams. I mean, look, as Julius's best year was his last year, 2003. And that was when he came back from the suspension. And he was very good that year. He rushed for 1,268 yards and had 10 touchdowns. He rushed for 5.5 yards per carry. He just didn't play on a very good team, Ryan. And so you tamp that down a little bit. Audric this year had 1,341 yards in only 12 games. Julius played in 12 as well. So Audric had 41, 32, 73 more yards. Audric had 8 more touchdowns, and Audric averaged almost a full yard more per carry. And Audric also had more value in the pass game, just numbers wise. He had 17 catches for 142 yards, and Julius had 10 catches for 53 yards. I mean, so just production wise, and then that was Julius's basically 5th year. Audric did this as a true junior. If you look at their true junior years, Julius in 2001 had 718 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, 4.3 yards per carry, and Audric was at 1,300 yards. I mean, it's not close in that regard. So Julius, I don't know that we ever saw the best of Julius Jones at Notre Dame because of team he played on, what was around him, offense, missing the year, all that kind of stuff. Because he was a little different athlete when he came back. He was a little bit stiffer, a little bit thicker. He wasn't quite as explosive as he was. So, I mean, Audric would be one. He'd be one. I'd have to think about some others, but there's been some pretty good guys.
I mean, production-wise, Josh.
Yeah, production-wise. I think Josh Adams is more of a byproduct of the system. I think if you'd have put Julius on the 17 team, it would have looked way different. I don't think it would have looked any different if you'd have put Julius on this year's team with Audric. And I think Audric was the perfect back for this team because of his unique skill set. Really fit this team very, very well. Audric was really good this year. I mean, and there were times where, I mean, you go break down the Clemson game where you're thinking, the offensive line blocked pretty well in the first half because Audrey kept ripping off big runs. And then you go back and you watch it in the all-22 and you're like, no, he just made something out of nothing there. That probably should have been a 2-yard loss. And he turned it into a 22-yard run. I mean, he just was excellent. Julius was really good. I just don't know if he was quite the back that maybe some of us remember looking back. And he did have that one phenomenal game against Pitt. I mean, that was tremendous. And I know I'm going to get some angry text messages from friends of mine telling me how good Julius Jones was. And he was a great back in 2003. And he was underutilized for a big chunk of his career, in my opinion, as well, Ryan. I think you could make that case too. But I mean, Kyron in 2020 was pretty flipping good. I mean, he was a pretty good back that year. Dexter Williams in 18, once he came back, was really good. I mean, Dexter had almost 1,000 yards and missed the first 4 games of the year. I mean,
in 2015.
Procise in 2015 was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, they've had some pretty good backs. Darius Walker was not a great back, but Darius Walker was the perfect back for that 05-06 offenses because he was he was a pass catcher, he was a slasher, he was the perfect complement to what that team was. But I would have liked to have seen like a Julius Jones be like that hammer on that team. That would have been fun to watch. But there's been some good backs. Maybe not NFL guys until recently, but yeah, there's been some good guys. Last 25 years. That's a good one, Sean. That's a good one. It's a good debate. And I know that there's going to be some people that are like, oh, Julius this, and I get it. And he's a Virginia guy, so I'm partial to that too. I think they've had some guys that were really, really good. And the other thing is just Julius was just kind of good for that 1 year. Now, I don't think it was his fault, right? If you went back and look, I don't think it was him. It was more so the teams and the coaches and how he was used. But yeah, I just don't think he was the same athlete when he came back in 23. Because I think people think the same guy that we saw return those kicks for touchdowns as a freshman is the same athlete we saw in 03, and he wasn't. Because he spent that year away working out with his brother, and he came back jacked, but he came back stiff and tight, in my opinion. He just wasn't the same kind of elusive athlete like he was early in his career, in my opinion. But again, what would he have done if he'd have played on a better team? That's a question. But we don't know. We don't know what he would have done. I know what Audric did this year on a not great offense. Let's be honest. I mean, he was a heck of a player. Good
Julius
question.
was also a 1-year wonder in the NFL as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. What did he do in the NFL, Ryan? I know he had
He was like a 1,000-yard back as a rookie, and he ran for like 200 plus on Thanksgiving Day that year for the Cowboys, and then I think he just broke down after that.
Yeah.
So.
He went 819 as a rookie, 993 in year 2, 1,084 in year 3, and then 588, 698, 663, and then he was done. So, yeah, interesting. His brother was a pretty good back too.
Yeah.
All right.
Notre Dame 2164. Thank you for the question. I'm very high on Jaden Osbury, and I'm so excited to see what he can be in year 2. Do you guys think that he forces his way onto the field this year? I hope so. That's all I'm at right now.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Do I think that he will? I don't know. Do I think he can? Absolutely. Absolutely. Ryan, I think we're going to see a more of a rotation at linebacker this year than we saw last year. I do.
We should.
I do.
We should.
Yeah. I understood them not having a deeper rotation this year. 2 reasons why. Number one, the defense wasn't on the field a ton, so they didn't need to play 75 snaps every single week. And number 2, I do think there was a pretty big gap between the starters and the guys behind them this year because of this huge experience gap. I don't think that's going to exist next year. Like, even if Drake Bowen is everything we hope he should be, I still want to see Kingston in the rotation. If Jalen Sneed is everything that we hope he can be and starts as the will, great. I still want to see Jaden Osbury. And vice versa. If Jaden Osbury is everything that I think he is, and I had him as a top 50 recruit, if he takes the will starting job at will, and he's everything I hope he could be, I still want to see Jalen Sneed as part of the rotation playing there, or Preston Zinner or whoever. So I do want to see a little bit more of a rotation than we did last year, but I don't want that to be taken as a criticism of them not rotating last year, because I actually understand why we didn't see as much of a rotation this year as we should have seen in previous years, and what I think we should see in 2024. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, Yeah, you had a lot of experience coming back in this past season, and I think for the most part, the linebackers played pretty well in
Mhm.
2023. So it's going to be a little bit of a youth movement, and I don't think that you're in a position where you've recruited really well at the position, and you should be able to have a deeper rotation than what you've had in years past. And there should be no just foregone conclusion as far as like should be look, I if Drake Bowen wins the job and he is the best player by far and he plays the most snaps, great. But like as of right now, nobody has shown us anything on the college level where it's just like that guy is a unquestioned starter, no doubt about it. I mean, Jack Kaiser's obviously going to play a lot because of what he's done throughout his career, but overall, there should be an open competition and there should be a lot of rotation.
Yep, agree.
Zach Martin, early 2026, Evil Laugh recruiting crushes both naturally and reasonable Notre Dame targets. Man, we're talking about 2026 already, man.
I
Come on
don't
now.
even know that I could name a 2026
Ryder
caliber.
Lyons, quarterback, Blaine Bradford out of
Oh,
Louisiana. The
that's one I
safety is a
like.
really good
Yep.
player. The Utu kid out of Orange Catholic, the offensive tackle that I believe is the only offensive lineman that Notre Dame has
I haven't
offered in
seen him yet.
2026 is a good player. I mean, otherwise, it's a small list. There's a lot of quarterbacks that have been offered, or well, a decent amount of quarterbacks have been
Yeah.
offered. Otherwise, I think there's one offensive tackle. I think there's two safeties, maybe. Like it's a small list right now, obviously.
Mhm.
Levi Perez, excuse me. How do you grade the Wink Martindale hire by Sharon Moore?
Ryan, I don't watch as much NFL as you do. What are your thoughts on? I mean, the first thing I thought is they're trying to get back to the NFL thing, which worked with Mike McDonald, which worked with Jesse Minter. I think they're very different types of personalities in Wink Martindale. I'm not
Yep.
on the hoof. I don't know that I love this one.
Oh, I think it's a
To be
great
honest
hire,
with you.
man. I think it's a great hire. Wink is
Well,
one of the most well-respected defensive minds in the NFL. He's a
in the
very good
NFL,
defensive mind.
but do you
Sure.
think he'll be able to transition to college? Is my question.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, he's not an overcomplicated system. It's not like one of those systems where you're just like it's going to take 2 years to really figure it out. And to be, I mean, he's a very aggressive-minded coach. He's going to let
Mhm.
guys fly around, but he's a pretty sound defensive coordinator as well. I mean, he just plays loose. Like he likes to be aggressive, a lot of
Mhm.
blitzing and different styles that way. So I think it's a. I mean, going from McDonald to Minter and now replacing him again. I mean, I think Wink is a very good defensive coordinator, so I expect him to be good.
Here's my concern. You're going from a guy who has not coached in college since '03.
Al
That's
Golden
the
wasn't a
challenge for
defensive
me.
coordinator since 2003 either. I mean, so
Yeah, but
it
Al Golden had
happens.
been in college. He'd coached in
Sure,
college as a head
sure.
football coach and ran defenses. So Al Golden was in college in 2015. He knew the recruiting landscape. He knew more of it, and he even had an adjustment to make. You're talking about a guy who
Yep.
hasn't been in college in 20 years. That would be my concern. I don't know anything about him as a defensive coordinator. That's why I wanted to kick that to you because I don't watch the NFL. He did play at Defiance College where I coached, but yeah, that would be my only concern. Would be that transition and wondering how much he's going to recruit. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like what I say with Al Golden. If the product is good enough and you have other good recruiters on the staff, you'll still get your players.
Yep.
Here's the next one.
John A1, my conspiracy in the SEC urged the NCAA to hit Florida State and Miami with sanctions when the ACC expanded in 2005 to keep those schools from dominating recruiting, which allowed Florida and Alabama dynasties. Do you agree?
Oh, I don't know. Would I put it past them? No, but I have no evidence of that. I mean, Miami was getting pretty blatant with some of the stuff they were doing. I mean, I think you'd have a greater. I'd be more sympathetic to you if you wanted to tell me that what happened to SMU was BS because they weren't supposed to be a big boy. I think that I don't know that what SMU was doing was necessarily worse than what was happening at A&M and Texas, but you're SMU, you're not Texas, you're not Oklahoma, you're not supposed to be doing this. And then they just got a little crazy with it. And I think that's kind of what happened at Miami. They got a little crazy with some of the stuff they were doing. Some of the stuff was just so blatant. You're just like, guys, you can't do that. So I don't know that. I don't know, man. I don't know if I.
Yeah.
Could
have
it
no
have
idea.
happened? Sure. I wouldn't put it past the SEC to do that, but I have no evidence that happened. And the stuff that we do know about, I'm a little less familiar with. I can't quite remember Florida State. I know they had like the free shoes and all that, but I don't think Florida State took a hit because of that. I think Florida State took a hit just because Bobby Bowden started getting a little up there in years, and just the program wasn't as good, and money became a lot more of a thing. And Florida State's never been a super wealthy school. I mean, I think that's hurt them. That's hurt them quite a bit. Is as facilities and the facilities, race to the arms race, so to speak. And it became so much more about how much you can spend on this, this, and this. And Florida State's just not a school that can spend. I think those things all factored into this being an issue for Florida State than others. But look, here's the deal with Florida State. You hire the right coach, you're going to win. I mean, let's be honest. There's only been one coach in Florida State's history that's won with any consistency. That's Bobby Bowden. So is Florida State a place that can win if or did they happen to just get the right coach at the right time? I don't know. We haven't seen that proven out. I just think there's a lot of things that factor into why Florida State has struggled. And yes, Miami got hit with heavy sanctions, but we've seen teams hit with heavy sanctions that rallied just fine. Bama got hit with some pretty heavy sanctions from the Mike DeBose era, and they bounced back just fine. Why? Because they eventually led him to Nick Saban. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the reality of it, Ryan, is, Penn State got hit with some pretty heavy sanctions, and they're a pretty good football team again now, and would be even better if they had a better head coach, in my opinion. I mean, so I think the problem at Miami is Miami's just made a string of bad hires, and it's just not the football program just not supported by the school the way it should be.
Sure.
And the biggest example is the fact they won't even build them an on-campus stadium. They have to drive almost 40 minutes to go play a home football game. It's like a buddy of mine I was having this argument the other day with a friend of mine, and I'm actually kind of get your thoughts on this. He was saying that he doesn't think Nebraska can ever be a top team again. And he used Pitt as an example. He's like, well, Pitt will never be what they were in the 70s and 80s. And I said, I don't know if Nebraska can ever get to the point where they were as dominant as they were in the 80s. And that's true for other teams. But I actually think Nebraska, with the right coach, has a better chance to get there for a host of reasons, where they're located, meaning they go to Texas, California. I said, but the other thing is support. Pitt will never be what they were in the 70s and 80s because, A, there's not the talent in the state that it used to have. But number two, the school doesn't care about the football team the way that Nebraska's school and fan base cares. They don't even have a home stadium. They tore down their on-campus stadium and they make them play with the Steelers. The fan base is apathetic. It's a professional sports town that happened to go through a little bit of about a 10 to 15 year period in the 70s and 80s with Tony Dorsett and Dan Marino, some other guys, where they were really good at football. But it was more so because they had really good players and had a couple. Johnny Majors was a really good coach. It was never because it was a program committed to success the way that Nebraska is. Now, I don't think Nebraska can have the 20-year stretch like they had under Tom Osborne. But I think Nebraska can be pretty good again with the right coach. And I feel that way about Florida State. I don't think it will matter who Pitt's head coach is. I don't think Pitt's ever going to be a dominant program again like they were for that stretch, because I don't think the school cares to be a dominant program again. And I don't think the community really. I think Pittsburgh people would like for the Pitt football team to be good. I think they care. As long as the Steelers are good, they don't care. So that's what I think that, to me, the big difference is between like those two programs, like Pitt and Nebraska. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think there's a little bit of that to Florida State.
I think Nebraska can get somewhat back. I mean, I briefly remember like those 90s teams, like the 95 team, right? Going back and list, like, I don't think they'll ever get back to that point because I just think the power structure is different. But I do think that they, with the right coach intact and because they do have money behind them, they do have fan loyalty behind them, and you're going to be able to keep most great Nebraska players in states. I mean, we saw that just in the 2024 cycle that there's still a pool for Nebraska kids to stay in Nebraska. And if you're able to recruit well, I think that they can gain some momentum back. I do think they are maybe somewhat of a ceiling as far as like just how high they can go. But I do think that they could get back in that regard. Florida State, I think Florida State's still one of those teams that when they're good, they're cool. You know what I mean? Like, I think they still have that. And I think Miami could get back at some point too, because Miami does have that flash to them where like they have that structure where it's like, if they have the right coach in place and they are in a little bit of a recruiting momentum, like it is cool to be a part of the U. You know what I mean? So they have that lore. There are some schools that don't have that lore though, and so I think that there's possibilities, but it's going to take the right coach in the right time and maybe a couple programs down because
Yeah.
there's coaching changes and a lot of miscellaneous things like that.
Miami needs to get more support for the football team. That Miami's in a similar situation what Notre Dame was in the past, where the administration didn't really care as much about football as they need to succeed. Look, you can't be a consistently good football program if you're fighting against your administration. You just can't. And I think that's something that's Miami struggled with for a long time. And so what that did is that opened up a vacuum. The school's not going to support us. These boosters will. Luther Campbell will. Nevin Shapiro, whatever that guy's name, will. And so you that void's going to get filled somehow when the expectation is that you're supposed to win. Because the expectations are Miami to win, but we're just not going to do what we need to do to support you. And so I do think Miami can win again if they get the right support. I think Florida State can be good, but that's a think. And the reason I say the difference is Miami, number one, is an even bigger hotbed of recruiting than Florida State is. Because Florida State has to kind of travel to other parts of Florida to get top players. Where Miami, they call it the state of Miami. I mean, it's just literally from like Orlando down. It's just, I mean, if we only recruited that region, we're going to have phenomenal football teams, right? And so it's will they support them or not? That's the question. And we've seen Miami have success with multiple coaches. Where with Florida State, they had that 1 year with Jimbo, but outside of that, Florida State,
I mean, they did have one coach for like 30 years, though.
That's what I'm saying.
It's a little bit of a limited sample size.
That's the point, though, Ryan.
Yeah.
It's like it's like Penn State. Well, we know they win titles under Paterno. We haven't seen anybody else win since then. But Paterno left in like 2010. But that's the whole thing. Is like this school doesn't have the track record of winning with anybody else. And they haven't really won since. Is that because of circumstances that have happened to them? Or was he a unique coach that wanted a place that you can't win otherwise? I don't know. I think they can.
I think
because of where they are.
With the right coach. Yeah.
Oh,
I think
agree with Penn State. I think so too.
They can recruit. They can recruit at a very high level. So
because Pennsylvania doesn't have the talent it used to have, but it still has a lot of talent. But the whole East, even though Pennsylvania is not what it was in the 80s from producing talent, you're starting to see the East Coast start to produce more. I mean, Penn State's made a killing in Virginia and Jersey, and they just got Josiah Brown in New York. I mean, there's enough of a base there, and then they can go to Texas and get kids and Florida to get kids. I agree with you. I think Penn State can win, but again, that's another school that has great support. That's the difference. They'll spend money. Florida State hasn't had that, and that's the concern I have about Florida State. They're hoping to go through this lawsuit to get to the SEC or the Big Ten so they can get the money that way because they don't have the support from the fan base or the donor class that other places do. Nebraska has that support. Pitt doesn't. And that's the UCLA to me is never going to be what they were under Terry Donahue as a football program. I don't think. I just don't think there's support for it. They don't care about that. They care about being good at basketball. I don't know why. I mean, they're not willing to do both, but that's just the reality of it. And not every program can win, in my opinion, even with the right coach. Michigan State was never going to win like LSU did with Nick Saban.
Sure.
Or Alabama did with Nick Saban. It's a different animal. Fun conversation.
Corey Dean with the question. Thank you, Corey. Who decides who gets into the Hall of Fame and what is their criteria to get in? Well, I mean, I can't speak to what the individual criteria is. I mean, I think it's very general of like a great player should make the Hall of Fame. And that's just kind of my opinion, though. There's a panel of voters. And I think that it's like, longtime sports writers and people that there is a committee, though, that puts forth the votes for players getting in, and the percentage of votes equals to a player being able to be nominated in type of thing. I mean, it's similar to like the Major League Baseball and how pretty much every Hall of Fame does it. So we had 99 problems with BK81. If in Andre Johnson's defense, he played with terrible quarterbacks for the majority of his career. I just don't agree. I think there's wide receivers that were worse, had worse situations than what Andre Johnson had, in my opinion.
And there's a difference, Ryan, between not having a great quarterback and having a terrible quarterback. And we talk about this all the time. We fall way too much into hyperbole when we're having these conversations. And we go from it's either this extreme or that extreme. And I just don't think that's accurate. And as you very well said, there's been a lot of quarterbacks that there's a lot of receivers that have had great success that had worse quarterbacks than what Andre Johnson played with with Texas or with the Texans, excuse me.
Andre Johnson was also always the unquestioned number one receiver on his team and never had to really share the ball much. But
agree. This is this is how this next question is going to finish, Ryan, just so I can give it to you beforehand.
Yep. Michael Parks, how did Myles Garrett win Defensive Player of the Year over TJ Watt? Was the second part?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think so. We're looking at raw stats is why people are asking this, because they're going to say, TJ Watt had more sacks and then probably more tackles for loss. Like the numbers next to each other kind of stacked. But when you go on a play-by-play perspective, I'm pretty sure Myles Garrett had a higher pressure rates. I'm pretty sure he had just like a more play-by-play perspective. He was a more efficient football player. And I'll just say this, TJ Watt's a great player. Myles Garrett's a great player. I do think that opposing offenses scheme more to stop Myles Garrett than they do to stop TJ Watt, in my opinion. So
can I ask you a question on that, Ryan? Do you think that are you saying that because Myles Garrett is just a more dominant player that you have to game plan for, or more because TJ has a better supporting cast? So it's harder.
I think TJ has I think TJ has a better supporting cast.
I don't know. I'm truly asking.
On the front. Yeah, no, I mean TJ plays next to Cameron Hayward, who is a great player. He plays across from Alex Highsmith, who's one of the most underrated players in the NFL at the other defensive end position. So I think that it's harder to just say we just need to eliminate TJ Watt, because then you're putting other guys in one-on-one situations against Cleveland. Like, you're constantly rolling your protection to Myles Garrett. You are double teaming him constantly. He's a game record, man. He's a freak show. And if you ask me just flat out, who do I think is a more dominant football player? My answer would be Myles Garrett. Yes, it would 100% be Myles Garrett. I think that Myles Garrett has more potential to take over football game, and that's nothing against TJ. TJ is a future Hall of Famer in himself. He's a great football player. But you're asking me why he won Defensive Player of the Year? It's because I do think that offenses generally are doing more to stop Myles Garrett than they are to stop TJ Watt, in my opinion.
So, Ryan, as a follow-up question to this, are you saying basically, and I assume this is what happened, that Myles Garrett did, in fact, win the defensive?
Yeah, he won Defensive Player of the Year.
Okay.
Yep.
So what you're basically saying is that you think this one was done the right way, even though you could maybe say, hey, this player might have had more, production in this regard, and he did. TJ Watt led the NFL in sacks this year. What you're saying is that they didn't just get obsessed with numbers. They actually looked at the dominance of the level of play and made the right choice. Is that okay?
I think Myles Garrett was more dominant than TJ Watt was this year. It doesn't mean more productive, but it's a different situation, a different scenario. I mean, yeah, I'll say this, and people can say whatever they want. It's just my opinion, obviously. But if TJ Watt and Myles Garrett were on the same defense in the year 2023, offenses are playing to stop Myles Garrett more than they are TJ Watt, in my opinion.
Here's another Hall of Fame question, Ryan. I'll go ahead and read this one because it's for you. Fighting Mike 87 said, Ryan, what's your Hall of Fame opinion on Robert Mathis, who has even better numbers than Freeney, and I believe has the NFL record for sack fumbles?
Robert Mathis was just a very one-dimensional football player. And I think that when you're talking about Hall of Fame players, I think that the guys need to go in are the all-around dominant football players. So while Robert Mathis was a great sack artist, and I'm sure he'll eventually get in the Hall of Fame for what he was able to do, I just think he was too one-dimensional for me to say, like, that's a first ballot or even maybe a second ballot Hall of Famer. Like, it's just, you need to be an all-around football player for me personally to say, like, that's a no-brainer. Robert Mathis is a borderline Hall of Fame player because, yes, he had great sack production. He was really good in that one area of the game, but he was also a very one-dimensional pass rusher as well. And he always needed to be kind of the second fiddle to a great pass rusher as well. So I think that he was a very good pass rusher, good overall player, but was he a great player? I think that's pretty debatable.
He also didn't have more sacks than Dwight Freeney. career wise. Now he didn't play as long, but Dwight Freeney had 125 and a half career sacks. Robert Mathis had 123. But he also played 25 fewer games than Dwight Freeney as well. So just putting it out there.
Yep.
Just to clarify,
he's a very good player, and them together was awesome because they were just like get after the quarterback. But you were never lauding Robert Mathis for being a great run defender, for instance, right? Like it was not his game because he was like 6'2", 230 pounds. Like he just wasn't ever going to be that guy, you know?
Yeah, and I just think, I don't know, call me crazy, but I just think the NFL needs to be reserved for those kind of guys. Not a guy who was really good in this one area and put up some numbers, but wasn't ever considered necessarily a great player. Because I did watch NFL in much more so during Robert Mathis's career than currently. Like I couldn't tell you the difference between TJ Watt and Myles Garrett. I just don't watch the NFL. I watched Robert Mathis. Obviously the Broncos played against some of those good Colt teams. He was another guy that you watch. Like I know the numbers were one, but when you watch them play, in my opinion, one of the guys, Dwight Freeney, you watched and said, that's a great player. The other guy you just watched said, it's a pretty good pass rusher, right? There's a difference to me. And so, I know the numbers are what they are, but the other thing you could ask yourself is, did Robert Mathis get some of the production he had because he was playing opposite Dwight Freeney for part of his career? You know what I mean? Those are other things you can ask yourself.
Indianapolis also never really had a great defense when Robert Mathis was there. And I would say this is like in most years, Robert Mathis was maybe the third best defensive player they had because Bob Sanders was dominant when he was playing before he started getting injured. And then Dwight Freeney was obviously a better player, in my opinion. Right. So, yeah. Gary Brackett even was a better player overall for a couple years.
Yeah, linebacker. Well. Yeah, that's a good one. And I'm trying to look down like some of the years they had. Yeah, some of the production that they had in years that he played. But yeah, Robert Mathis, Dwight Freeney, Bob Sanders, some decent players. But yeah, you're correct. They never had they had a couple teams that had pretty good defenses, but they were never consistently like a great defense.
No,
back then.
They got hot the one year when Peyton won his first Super Bowl. They were hot in the playoffs, but it wasn't a great defense though.
Titus asks, Ryan, is Jack Lang getting close to a commitment date?
I thought coming out of the junior day, something might be coming up, Titus, but there just doesn't seem to be any movement there, which is kind of weird. And Jack is taking visits and still doing his recruiting thing. So as of right now, there is no plan for a commitment date. Could that change? We'll see, but doesn't feel like he's in a major rush to do so. So we shall see.
He's got some good options. I mean, he just got offered by, I think Bama and Georgia also both offered. So it's like if Notre Dame doesn't wait for him, he'll have plenty of good options.
Yes, he will.
That's for sure. Let's see here. This is an interesting one that I've wanted to get into since we were having a Hall of Fame conversation earlier.
Christopher Galloway, I'm just in today. Have y'all talked about Sterling Sharp? I remember Sterling for a 5 to 6 year period was as good as you'll find, right? Like he was incredible for the Packers before the neck injury. The conversation's always about how much time is enough to make that, right? I mean, because I would say he was a great player for when he played, but 5 to 6 years is a very small window. You know what I mean? It's just a tough conversation there.
He played for 7 years, and he had 5 1,000-yard seasons, 2 seasons of over 100 catches when it wasn't as prominent as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And in his last season is at 29, Ryan. His last season in the NFL, he had 94 catches for 1,119 yards and 19 touchdowns or 18 touchdowns. So, yeah, to your point, that's the question. Yeah, it's the here's the thing. Does Terrell Davis make it to the Hall of Fame if he has the same exact regular season numbers? I don't think he does. Part of the reason I think Terrell Davis is a Hall of Famer is because he also was a phenomenal postseason player. I mean, Terrell Davis had 8 straight games in the postseason with over 100 yards rushing. That is something you're just he broke John Rickens' record, has a Super Bowl MVP. It's the combination of the two. Sandy Koufax didn't pitch very long, but I believe he won at least one World Series, during his tenure.
His stats for what Sandy Koufax pitched to are just dumb.
Right.
It doesn't even make sense.
So there's a lot of things that factor into that for me. And when you look at Shannon Sharp, unfortunately for him, he got hurt right before they really went on that run. And that's hurt him. And if you want to talk about a guy playing with bad quarterbacks, I mean,
Don
for most of
Majkowski.
his career, he had Don Majkowski and Mike Tomczak were his quarterbacks.
Hey man, he had the Magic Man thrown to him.
Yeah.
Man, what were you talking about?
He didn't get Brett Favre till 92.
Imagine if he would
And
have played like 5 more years with Brett Favre.
Yeah.
Would have been
Yes.
been
Oh, well, he would have had a Super Bowl. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, because they won a Super Bowl, I think, 2 years after he had the injury. So personally, I think Sterling Sharp is a Hall of Famer because even though he played for a short period of time, he was an elite player that didn't get hurt, didn't stop being good because he just was a flash in the pan. He had a devastating injury. But man, he was averaging over 100 catches and like 1,300 yards his last few years and had 42 receiving touchdowns in his last 3 years. And in his last 3 years, led the NFL in catches twice, led the NFL in touchdown receptions twice, led the NFL in receiving yards. In 7 years, he led the league in catches 3 times. That's pretty good.
I wouldn't say anything if he goes in because again, my main criteria is, was he a great player? And my answer to Sterling Sharp would be yes, he was a great player. Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you're one of those people, I mean, and was a great player like right away. His second year, he had 90 catches for 1,400 yards and 12 touchdowns. I mean,
he went to South Carolina, right? Sterling?
Yes, he went to South Carolina. He's Gamecock, and his brother went to Savannah
State, correct?
Yeah. But yeah, he was doing that with Don Majkowski at quarterback in 1989. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, he had a cool nickname, but he didn't play with great players either. But when you watched him play, Ryan, you're like, that's an elite player. I mean, that was my golden era of NFL, late 80s, 90s. Like, I loved the NFL back then. When you watch Sterling Sharp play, you're like, that guy is one of the best to do it. I mean, he is elite. And when you're standing out in an era when there's guys like Jerry Rice and Tim Brown, and you know what I mean, you're a great player. And he did. He stood out amongst those greats during that tenure.
The only thing bad about Sterling Sharp was his face mask, but that's a conversation for another day. That face mask was awful. Terrible face mask for wide receiver. Salty. The Irish moved up from number 9 to number 7 in the Athletics preseason top 25 versus Bama. As Bama and Washington either moved back, Bama, or out Washington, should Michigan still be number 6?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about this when I put that article out the other day, Ryan. I do not think that they should still be 6. And the whole premise of, like I've said this before, you're the champs until somebody beats you, unless you have a major overhaul. And Michigan is losing a lot from their roster, but also they lost their head coach, and that's a pretty big loss. Sure. I'm not going to like pound on the table and say this is a travesty that Michigan's still number 6. Okay, they won the championship, but they lost their head coach. They lost they're going to have a new offensive coordinator, even though they didn't lose their offensive coordinator. They lost their defensive coordinator. They lost their defensive line coach. The guys that were primarily responsible for a lot of the success they had are gone or are no longer in the positions they have. Like, is Grant Newsome going to be able to do as good of a job coaching the offensive line as Sherrone Moore did? Is it going to require Sherrone Moore to be more involved? We'll find out, what that's going to be. But it's not even just that. I mean, Jim Harbaugh's a huge loss for Michigan, a huge loss. And you lost J.J. McCarthy, you lost Blake Corum, you lost your 2 best receivers, you lost a lot from your defense. So, no, I don't think Michigan should still be number 6, but I also am not going to spend a whole show saying this is bull crap and fine. Number 6, they're defending champs. Okay, we'll find out soon enough. But I personally would not have the number 6 after Jim Harbaugh left. I think Jim Harbaugh had a big reason why they were as good as they were. And it's not the same as like Marcus Freeman replacing Brian Kelly, because I thought Notre Dame had a head coach that was holding the program back, where Jim Harbaugh, to me, just did a phenomenal job these last 3 seasons getting the most out of that program. And so, yeah, I'd have them lower. And they dropped Washington completely out of the top 25, like completely out. Yeah, I do too. It's just wild, the offseason that they've had. Wild.
That's crazy. Moving to the Big Ten, really too. It's not the most ideal situation to be in if you're No, I do like Jed Fish, but it's not the best situation to be in right now.
It's not about Jed Fish, Ryan. I mean, you're starting that roster over, basically. I mean, you're just like Bama loses all these players, and you're like, yeah, it sucks that they lost that guy, but you're going to replace him with some other former top 100 prospect. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Where Washington, it's like the debate we had with Oregon State. Like people say, well, you know, Notre Dame should get more credit for beating Oregon State because Notre Dame had a bunch of players out too. And I was like, well, it's not the same though. When Oregon State loses their top right tackle, they're not replacing him with a Charles Jagasol. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's different. Going from Joe Walsh to Charles Jagasol is a whole lot different than going from the kid that Oregon State had at right tackle to whoever they replaced him with. It's a huge difference. Yeah, it's a huge difference. And so it's the same thing in Washington. Washington, because Kalen DeBoer had only been there 2 years, he hadn't had a chance to build the roster up, and he hadn't recruited all that great, to be honest with you. You know, he's walking into a tough situation, man. Very tough situation. We have a 2-part question about the women's basketball team, Ryan.
Okay, I probably won't have much analysis on this one. Scott L., I have watched every second of women's hoops this season. I'm very concerned. Hannah's an elite scorer, but her creating offense by herself has kept our other scorers from getting into rhythm. Our offense disappears for 6-minute stretches. Our bigs play horrible defense and are in foul trouble a lot. Niall plays Hannah and Sonia 38 minutes per game and plays them up 20 in the fourth. Will she fix it? I doubt it.
Well, I don't know that she can right now, right? I mean, you got to think about the fact that they're missing a lot. Is Sonia Citron and Hannah Hidalgo playing 38 minutes a game if they have Olivia Miles and Cass Prosper healthy all year this year? No, they don't. I'm not defending every decision that Coach Ivy has made. Sean and I were talking about this the other day. I think she's done. Sean Stavis and I were talking about this. I don't think she did a very good job recruiting and developing the bigs. I think she relied way too much on the portal. And last year it worked great. The girl they got from Texas was great for them last year. But this year they're not as good down low. Maybe they're asking Maddie Westbeld to play like a big, and she should be a stretch. I mean, she's good at what she did at Utah, popping out, hitting threes, you know, doing things like that. She's not a traditional big, but she has to play like one. She's not Jessica Shepard. She's not Brianna Turner in solid play. Now, they do have the girl coming in next year. I think it's Katie Koval that's coming in, who's like 6'4", like a legit post player, top 5 national player. She's up for the Naismith Award. That's good, but it can't just be her. You've got to start recruiting the bigs the way you're recruiting guards, because nobody in the country has recruited guards, in my opinion, better than Niall Ivy the last couple of years. I mean, you know, Coach Staley's done a great job, but like when you go play South Carolina and you go play teams like LSU, you're going to get killed down low. And to me, you don't have the help around her. But I think part of the thing that you're complaining about with Hannah being an elite scorer but creating by herself has kept them others from getting into rhythm. I don't agree with that, Scott, to be honest with you. I think that's as much out of necessity as anything else. I mean, they went through a stretch this year where they didn't have Sonia Citron playing. She was hurt, and she's still not 100% coming back. They haven't had Cass Prosper all year. Emma Risch got hurt. She's out for the year. Olivia Miles is out for the year. So you've had a lot of injuries that have happened on your team this year that have kept you from ever really having your full team on the field, on the court at the same time. And I think that kind of factors into it a little bit as well. So, yeah, look, she's got to do a better job, Coach Ivy, in recruiting, more consistently recruiting the post. Because if you think about the great Notre Dame teams, yes, they had Skylar Diggins, and then, of course, later Jackie Young and Orika Ogunbowale and Marina Mabry. But that team won a championship because they also had Jessica Shepard and Brianna Turner down low. And they would bring Maddie's sister off the bench and give post minutes. So I think in the women's game today, size, to me, still dominates in a way that you don't see in the men's game, because you see such a difference. Like, you know, when South Carolina's putting a 6'8" girl on the court and Notre Dame's point guard is 5'6", you know, that's like a 6'3" guard in the men's game going against a 7'3" center. That's or 7'5" center. That's a huge, huge size difference. And the fact that you don't have any bigs that you can drive and dish to down low that can score the way that Jessica Shepard could back in the day, or Brianna Turner could, or Ruth Riley could back in the day when they won the first title, when Coach Ivy was the point guard. I do think that matters. I do think she has to do a better job of recruiting and developing post players. I'm hoping that Kate Koval can be sort of step one in getting there. We'll see. But yeah, I think that matters because you don't have to build the same way South Carolina does. But we saw it this year. Early on, Notre Dame was right there because Hannah was doing her thing and Sonia was doing her thing. But eventually, South Carolina could slow the game down, make it a half-court game. And there's such a huge difference in size between bigs in the women's game and guards in the women's game in a lot of ways that is just – it can really impact the game in the way that the game is played. And I think she has to find a balance there, in my opinion. I think Coach Ivey has to find a balance there. It's the program's going to be limited because, to your point, if the guards aren't on – they have no chance of beating a good team. None. Where Arike could have a bad game or Jackie could have a bad game and they'd still win and beat good teams because Jess went off or Brianna Turner had 15 boards and 5 block shots, right? I mean, you had that inside-out presence that you just don't have on this team. And that it also makes Maddie Westbeld not as consistently good because she has to do something that's not her game. So I think it needs to get fixed. I just don't necessarily go to your degree. You only have 7 healthy players right now, really. You can only give so many minutes when you only have 7, 8 healthy players because of injuries. And so I think some of the stuff you're complaining about, Scott, I understand where you're coming from, but I think some of it's out of necessity because they're so injured. If Emma Risch wasn't hurt, she'd be playing more. If Cass Prosper wasn't hurt, she'd be playing more. And you'd have a 6'1" girl that could give you some help down low in certain areas. But you don't have those players. If you had Olivia Miles playing, then you'd have her playing on the ball and maybe Hannah playing off guard a little bit more, off the ball a little bit more. You could do more things with it, but you don't have your first team all-conference point guard from last year on the team. Sonia's been banged up all year. You don't have Cass Prosper. You don't have Emma Risch. You kind of understand why the bench is a little limited right now because you just don't have the players. And then you combine that with the fact that she has not recruited the high school post as well as I think she needs to, and hopefully starting to. I think all those things have factored in, but they're still a pretty good basketball team. Last night was disappointing, but they still went on the road and beat UConn not that long ago. They're just not an elite team right now. They're still a pretty good team, and now we need to see her take that next step to get there. So we'll see if she can.
Bielefeld Financial Services Incorporated. What's up, JP? Brian, did you enjoy the 20-inch bone-in ribeye at Texas Roadhouse, or did you make a different choice?
So we haven't had a chance to go yet. We have been dealing with all this stuff with our house, JP, but I've got it. Matter of fact, I got the gift card right here in my wallet, right in the top of my wallet. We're hoping to go here at some point in time next week. But I'll tell you what, JP, I'm not a huge ribeye fan because I just don't really like a lot of fat throughout the steak. And I'm a sirloin guy. So I love sirloins, especially the way, if you get a nice medium to medium rare sirloin, buddy, I love that. So when I go to Texas Roadhouse, and thank you for that, by the way, I'll probably just get the sirloin and maybe get a kicker ribs to go with it. That's probably what I'll do with your generous gift. So I really appreciate that, buddy. But yeah, I'll get. Ryan, you know me, man. I'm a creature of habit, right? I mean, so I know what I like, and I'm going to stick with it. So yeah,
that's fair.
Yep.
All right, we had Irish 49. Who are your favorite Notre Dame players to watch in the NFL now? Favorite Notre Dame players as of right now. I'm a Rams fan, so Kyron Williams is a joy to watch. He had obviously a great year for the Rams this year. I love watching Kyle Hamilton because I'm a defensive guy and seeing all the different ways that Baltimore is able to utilize him, both in man coverage and working in the slot, and robbing short zones, getting involved in the run game is pretty fun. And I think the kind of the old man, I guess, in the group now is Harrison Smith. But I mean, the hitman's still pretty dang good for the Minnesota Vikings. So there would be a couple guys.
Yeah.
We have Bobby says, "Hey guys, do you think since the decommitment of CJ May that Marcus Freeman and the boys go after another defensive end?" Well, yes, they're going after another defensive end. The main priority on the board right now is Damian Shanklin, who's out of Warren Central in Indianapolis, Indiana. That's the top guy. We also know that there's a couple guys, and if you're on the message board, Bob, you know that there's a couple defensive linemen that Notre Dame is still recruiting, is still kind of, going after and still making just making sure that the board stays intact and making sure that they have a board in general that they're still recruiting from. but it is Damian Shanklin is the top priority on the board currently for Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm. They've recently offered Javion Campbell, who they're going after, Ethan Utley, but those are more guys that are projected to be more inside guys. Yeah.
Yep.
I think they like where they're at with the last two classes, plus, Burgess, and then putting all their eggs, not putting all their eggs in the Damian Shanklin basket, but like putting their focus is what I mean to say right now on Damian Shanklin. So we'll see. But I think that's a good place to be. Here's one, Ryan from Archer 452. Ryan, who do you think? I don't even know how you can ask this question without the draft having happened yet. But who do you think has the top odds to win Offensive Rookie of the Year next year in the NFL? Would you favor Ohio State to make it 3 in a row with Marvin Harrison Jr.?
I mean, he'll certainly be in the contention, Archer. I mean, I think Brian makes a good point that it depends on who's on what team and everything. But I think the guys that you're going to see, regardless of where they end up, is Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm sure Malik Neighbors will be somewhat high, and then probably Drake May and Jaden Daniels. I'm sure that's probably the top 5 as far as like guys that are going to be high on the board. Maybe Brock Bowers is in there too, depending on if the Los Angeles Chargers or someone like that takes him. But I think overall, that's the top 6 guys. Like, that is it right there. It's Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brock Bowers. Like, those are probably the top 6 guys as far as Offensive Rookie of the Year from an early perspective. Marvin Harrison Jr. will certainly have a chance. I mean, he's probably going to be top 2 to 3 favored, but we do know that it's a quarterback-driven that's a quarterback-driven award for the most part. So I would say that probably the highest odds will be most likely Caleb Williams, depending on where he ends. But, we'll see, obviously.
Yep.
We had Beef Eater ND08. What would Brian Bosworth have been like if he had played for Notre Dame?
I have no idea. I don't know that. I have no idea. I don't know if he would have been able to partake in some of the things that he partook in to be the player he was at Oklahoma. He wouldn't have been able to act like he did at Oklahoma, but he still would have been a pretty good player at Notre Dame. I don't think he would have been the personality that he was.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah, probably not the fanfare of what he was at Oklahoma with the mullet and the style and all that type of stuff. But
no, that stuff wouldn't have flown at Notre Dame. Yeah,
yeah,
and plus he would have spent. I think most of his career, if not all of it, I believe also would have been with Jerry Faust as the head coach, which let me look at the years. Yeah, he was 84, 85, 86. Only would have had 1 year with Lou Holtz. And Lou Holtz wouldn't have let that stuff fly at all. But yeah, playing for Jerry Faust, I mean, he wouldn't have played on very good teams. That's the other thing, so I'm not sure.
We have Beef Eater with another one. What blocking scheme were we running with Josh Adams when Josh Adams had that monster year? What are we running now?
Well, they ran a lot of zone, read zone, lock zone, stuff like that. Ran a lot of inside zone, and they also ran some compliments off that. They ran some counter.
Yeah.
Josh wasn't a great counter runner, so they didn't run that a ton. At least as the season went on, they did. I think their first long touchdown of the season, I believe, was a counter. If I remember correctly, against Temple, it was like second play of the game. Yeah. They ran a counter.
I remember that one. Yeah.
Yeah. And he made it run. But like as the season wore on, it was a lot of G scheme, buck sweep, and counter as compliments to the inside zone is really
buck sweep was good for him too.
Yes, because he could just plant and go. Josh wasn't a super elusive guy. He was a one cut and get vertical guy. And the buck sweep was good to your point where he could just kind of work laterally, plant, and get vertical through a hole and run real fast. Counter wasn't as good as him because it requires a little different type of footwork, and it would work against some of the teams that weren't very good, but against the better teams, it wasn't overly effective because he was not a great make a quick cut kind of guy. That was more Dexter was really good at that stuff, and he could make some of those plays. But and Tony Jones was pretty good at that stuff as well. He had really nimble feet for a bigger guy. Josh was just hit the inside zone and go, baby. Get that perimeter hole on buck sweep and just go, baby, and be fast. And that's what made Josh so good. But he just wasn't a guy that was going to make a whole lot of people miss. Like they always talk, Pro Football Focus always talk about how many broken tackles he has. Like people be lunging at him, hitting him in the thigh with their hand, and they'd count that as a broken tackle or a missed tackle. And I'm like, guys, he's not making people miss. He's getting hit like from the side as they're getting dominated by that O line, and they're counting that as a forced missed tackle. And he was never the kind of guy that I viewed as like a making people miss kind of guy. He was a little bit lumbering as a cutter because he was so long-legged, Ryan. I mean,
Well, he
he
had
had some of the
thin lower
longest legs I've
body
ever
too.
seen. Yes.
He had thin lower body.
Super long leg.
If you would have told me, if I first saw Josh Adams, if you would have told me that he was a safety, I would have been like, yeah, makes sense. Looks like a safety to me. Doesn't look like a running back necessarily. I mean, he's just, like you said, he's taller, longer legs, and his legs weren't defined. Like he wasn't like a packed together dude below. So yeah. But he could run, man. He could run like the wind.
There's no doubt.
We had Riley Bly, who says, I keep hearing different parties saying Notre Dame's roster isn't there yet. If Michigan can win a championship, why can't this roster?
Well, number one, I think Notre Dame has had rosters that should have competed for championships. We've said that. There's been other reasons why. The other thing is, we said this before the season, Ryan. This was a year there's no great teams. We said that all offseason. There's no great teams. This is why it was important for Notre Dame to take advantage of that. So if Notre Dame gets into one of those years where there's no great teams, they have rosters that are capable. I mean, we talked about this last night, Riley. Sean and I talked about this, that Notre Dame has a chance, if some things can go right and some players play out, that they do have a team that could make a run this year. I don't think that they don't. It's just they don't have a roster that if you see a 2021 Georgia pop up or a 2020 Bama pop up or a 2019 LSU pop up or a 2018 Clemson pop up, they don't have the roster to beat that team, but not many people do. And that's why those teams are what they are. But look, Riley, it's been years since I've said, I don't think this team has a roster to compete. I mean, when Notre Dame's had really good teams, 21, 22, those teams weren't quite there yet, but this year's team, disappointed. This team should have been a playoff contender going into the Clemson game and coming out of the Clemson game. This team should have been better than it was. There's no doubt. So, but at the same time, I think Michigan is just the culture at Michigan is better, more so than the overall roster. They're coached better. Let's be honest. They were coached better this year across the board at different spots than what Notre Dame was. Yeah.
That's the biggest difference in my opinion. It's not a roster issue in terms of talent. I think that they're probably at least comparable. I mean, I would say Michigan had a pretty deep roster this year. I mean, there was a lot of guys that had played, and like if a Zach Zinner goes down, you had someone that could come in and cushion that blow. So it wasn't like a huge loss from 1 to 2, right? But I mean, overall, I think the rosters are somewhat comparable as far as level of talent. The difference is that Jim Harbaugh did a heck of a job. Sharon Moore did a heck of a job. Jesse Minter did a heck of a job. Like it was just a really well-coached team in a year where it wasn't a great team. There were a bunch of good to very good football teams, but overall, there wasn't the differentiation in talent gap in some years. So Michigan won because they were better coached than Washington. They were better coached than Alabama. Like they were just a better overall coaching staff, in my opinion. I think that was the biggest difference maker.
And they had a culture that everybody bought into.
Yeah,
that flat out
tough-minded dudes.
Everybody bought into it.
Yep. Like I don't think there's going to be a lot of players off that Michigan team, especially offensively this year. They're like great NFL players. It's just going to be like, but
Ryan,
punch you in the mouth.
Said something early in the year. Somebody was talking about Michigan's going to have like 19 players drafted, and your comment was they may not have a single guy go in the first round. They just have a lot of good players that can play roles in the NFL. And like they were, like you said, they were very experienced and very deep.
Yes.
And but that's not why they won. They didn't beat Bama because they had better roster than Bama did, in my opinion. They didn't beat Ohio State because they have a better roster than Ohio State. Their culture's better, they're tougher, and they are coached exceptionally well. It's simple as that. And they do have talent. I mean, they didn't take a bunch of bums and turn them into dudes.
No, they just have a bunch of good day 3 football players. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just like they're not. I mean, I think next year actually is going to have more stars in the draft, right? Like that's when Will Johnson's going to be there, Mason Graham's, like those guys. Like that's more where you're going to get more high-level draft picks than what you're getting this year.
And that's where their roster is very comparable to Notre Dame's, Ryan, because that's where kind of Notre Dame is. If you're going to talk about does Notre Dame have any potential day one, early day two players, the conversation is going to primarily be around your freshmen and sophomores, right? And that's kind of how Michigan was. You just mentioned two true sophomores right there that could be high draft picks. Their veterans were just, they got Josh Walsh from UMass. Who thought when he signed with Michigan that kid was going to be a starter opposite Will Johnson and for teams going to championship? No, nobody thought that. But they didn't ask him to be a star. He was put him into a role, played to his strengths, and did a great job coaching and threw waves of defensive linemen at teams, and everybody just did their job. Just little simple things like just being able to tackle in space. I mean, if Notre Dame tackles in space better against Ohio State, they win. You know what I mean? Like it's as simple as that. I mean, Notre Dame's defense did a better job of holding Ohio State to fewer points and fewer yards than Michigan did. The difference is when the game was on the line, Michigan's defense stepped up and made stops, and Notre Dame's didn't. I mean, it's stuff like that, right? I mean, fewer yards against Michigan, Notre Dame gave up fewer yards to Ohio State than Michigan did, fewer yards per play than Michigan did, and held them to fewer points. Michigan won, Ohio State didn't. Or Notre Dame didn't, because number one, Michigan's offense did what they needed to do when the game was on the line as well. And that's the other thing about Michigan, Ryan, is there were games they played this year where it wasn't sexy, and they benefited from playing from a very weak schedule. That helps. We can't deny that either. But the fact is in the games they played, they were always the more physical team, or at least as physical as their opponent. They never got out physical. Can't say that about Notre Dame. We watched Notre Dame in back-to-back games against Duke and Louisville get their butt kicked in the trenches on the offensive side of the ball. That never happened to Michigan. They got outplayed sometimes, but they never got out-fought and out-hit. And that all comes down to culture and toughness and coaching and buy-in. And Notre Dame didn't have as much of that this year. Simple as that. And they also had a quarterback that, when things were breaking down, could go make plays with his legs. And I'd say that's one of the big differences between Notre Dame and Michigan, and something I'm excited about Notre Dame having moving forward. Very excited about that.
We had a question from Rob Loba123. Do you guys think Marcus Freeman went with someone like Lauren Landau because he wanted his football team to put some more effort and energy into football practices than in the weight room? Bayless was too exhausting.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, Matt Bayless's strength program was not exhausting in season. It was exhausting out of season, because that's how you build toughness and conditioning and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's an old school way of doing things and a new school way of doing things, but all of them are designed towards building mental toughness, physical toughness, and endurance. So you can play for 60, 70 snaps and repeat things over and over again. So I think Marcus Freeman went with someone like Lauren Landau because he believes in the philosophies that Lauren Landau believes in. But the end result's going to be the same. And from everything I've heard about from people that I've talked to, and it's not a ton, these are very, very hard workouts. I mean, they are very hard workouts. I mean, they're not just go get your curls in and it's, hey, let's go get a couple box squats in and then move on to the next. These are very hard out of season workouts. It's just, there's a lot of, you're just taking advantage of the new technology and some different emphasis on how to get to the same result, and it's no different than like I run a spread, you run an air raid, you run a power I, you're hoping that the end result's the same, but we're going to get there differently. And I just think that the way Lauren Landau goes about it is just more in line with what Coach Freeman believes in. But I also, again, I don't think Matt Bayless left because of Marcus Freeman didn't want him to be there anymore. There were other things that led to that. And I just think this is more in line with his philosophy. But I am not going to stand by and allow what I've seen some people try to do, which is try to now let's nitpick the job Matt Bayless did. Matt Bayless did a phenomenal job as Notre Dame strength conditioning coordinator. Simple as that. Marcus Freeman is going in a different direction because for other reasons, Matt Bayless isn't here anymore, and Marcus Freeman is going to go with someone he believes can carry out his philosophy. But Matt Bayless did a phenomenal job at Notre Dame. Phenomenal job at Notre Dame as a strength coach. It's no coincidence that Notre Dame was so much better in November and when Matt Bayless came in than where they were before he got here. That's not a coincidence. And you talk to any Notre Dame player, the built by Bayless thing was real, and that came from the players. They had faith in it, and they knew it was hard. It was very hard workouts. but they believed in it. So I don't agree with that aspect of it.
Will Falk says, what's y'all's take on this story about Kirk Herbstreit influencing Dylan Raiola's commitments? What sort of media ethical issues might be involved? I have not seen this story, so I don't know.
I
what
think
this
this is way overblown. I just
Okay.
think I'm not a fan of Kirk Herbstreit, but I just think he's getting to be a little bit of a whipping boy for some people. And he had nice things to say about Matt Rule and the Nebraska program to Donovan's dad, and people are turning it into something that it's not. He never said flip to Nebraska, don't go to Georgia. It was never anything like that from what I can tell. I just think it's people are bored and people like tearing down other people, and people are petty. That's what I think it is. From what I know of it, I could be wrong, and there could be a lot more to it than what I know. But that's my take on it.
Okay. Jimmy Page with a super chat. Thank you so much. What changes can we expect under Mike Denbrock?
Different zone scheme. Talked about more emphasis on inside zone. A lot more 11 personnel than we saw in the past. That's going to impact recruiting as well. We're not going to see 7-man scholarship tight end rooms anymore under Mike Denbrock. Pass scheme won't be like, oh my gosh, it's so much different than what they did. But at least at LSU and Cincinnati, there's a lot more post snap switch type stuff. Getting guys from one zone to another zone after the snap, not being so vertically oriented with route concepts. Yeah, a lot more overs, a lot more crossers, a lot more high lows, a lot more things where this guy starts here and they do this and then do other type of things. I think I've been talking about this for a while. You need that. I'm all for, hey, 4 verts is a great play. Double post is a great concept. And those things are all fine. But when you're only doing that kind of stuff, it makes it so much easier for teams to kind of get on you. And so I think those will be some changes as well. Aggressive throwing the ball down the field, but not throwing it down the field a million times. So, I do think we'll see some more aggressiveness down the field, but he's not going to be a throw it 95 times, past 20 yards kind of guy. But and a guy that's going to implement a lot more read concepts and RPO concepts. Even going back to Cincinnati, Mike Denbrock likes to run a lot of RPOs, a lot of read. They're going to run all different types of inside zone and read zone lock, RPOs off of it. They're just going to do a lot more of that stuff. So there's going to be a lot more decision making for the quarterback. A lot more. Let me rephrase that. There's going to be a lot more options for the quarterback in this offense than there was before when it comes to handoff, RPO, read zone keeps, throwing the ball, all that kind of stuff.
I'm excited to see him utilize Riley Leonard's ability as a dual threat in this offense because I think that they will be better. Look, 2023, you couldn't really do a ton with Sam Hartman in those areas, right? But Mike Denbrock has a track record that he can take advantage of the dynamic ability of quarterbacks. You can even look at his time at Notre Dame. He got a lot out of Deshaun Kaiser as a runner as well, even at Notre Dame, even though he's not the runner that Riley Leonard is, for instance, right? So excited, man. Excited. Another one from Pete Weber. What's up, Pete? What are your top 3 simple pleasures in life? What are we defining as a simple pleasure? I feel like I have a lot of these.
For me, just simple pleasure. Cooking for me is a very cathartic, just not a big deal, but for me, it's something that's very, very cathartic for me. Reading, I don't get to do it very, very much, but reading. And here's another simple pleasure for me, Ryan, that I very rarely get to do. Doing absolutely nothing. I used to just love to sit and just not have to think about something and just relax. And I don't get to do that very often anymore. So I'm not a very complicated person. I don't have a lot of other things beyond that.
I enjoy reading with my 3-year-olds at night. So I think that is very much enjoyable. I like snowfalls. So just seeing a snowfall outside. And then 3, I like to just go outside sometimes and just listen to all the bugs and birds making a little bit of chirp noises and all that type of stuff. I like the natural sound, I guess, is another simple pleasure. All right. The worst 2K big men HD. What are your thoughts of the Michigan? Wait, what are your thoughts of the Michigan?
Are your thoughts is what it's supposed to say. The Michigan AD being in charge of the college football playoff. So Ward Manuel was named the head of the college football playoff.
Yeah, I don't.
I
care,
gave my opinion
personally.
yesterday. I think it's ridiculous, but it's not surprising at all. I mean, my thing is, Ryan, you have the guy who is in charge of the program that's had how many investigations with the NCAA the last 3-4
Sure.
years, is now in charge of the college football playoff. It's just ridiculous, but it's par for the course for the NCAA. I mean, for it's not because it's not. I shouldn't say the NCAA because the NCAA has nothing to do with the college football playoff. It's
Sure.
par for the course for this whole college football enterprise. It's just the whole thing is just stupid.
Sam S., do you have more confidence that Riley Leonard will come to Notre Dame and be successful than you did Sam Hartman before he showed up? Yes. If people remember the shows when it first kind of started breaking, I had a lot of hesitation about Sam
Yeah.
Hartman. I really did. Riley Leonard, I don't have hesitation with Riley Leonard as a player. My only hesitation is spurned from he's coming off of an injury-riddled year,
Yeah.
right? So just being able to stay healthy and being able to acclimate that way. But if he's healthy, I am much more certain that Riley Leonard will be a better transition than what Sam Hartman was. Yes.
Couple things. Number one is what this whole experience taught me is trust my gut more. I was not very high on the Sam Hartman hire when it first got announced either, Ryan. And I kept saying this guy got mad at me on Facebook because I said he's a system quarterback. I mean, and I don't know that he can thrive outside of that system, but I talked myself into it's going to work. I did. And shouldn't have. I still think it should have been better than it was. I mean, that's the other part. It should have been better than it was. And I don't think it's all Sam Hartman's fault. I mean, there's other things that happened this year that he can't control. Riley Leonard, to me, outside of all that, you're getting a guy to me that can do more when things just aren't like the thing about college football, Ryan, is I don't care how smart you are, it's not always going to go how you drew it up. A decent amount of the time, it's not going to go how you drew it up. Do you have a quarterback that can still make plays when that happens?
Make the wrong
reality
reads.
is, yeah. And they didn't have that this year. Sam couldn't do that as a thrower. He couldn't do that as a decision maker, and he couldn't do that as a runner. And I think Riley can at least at the very least do that in one of those areas with his legs. And I think can do some other things as well. So yeah, and look, Jack Cohn was a great portal pickup, in my opinion. He did a very good job for Notre Dame. Sam Hartman didn't work out as much. What I don't want, and Sam's not doing this, but there's a lot of people that, well, Sam didn't work out, so Riley won't work out. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Just ridiculous.
It's like the helmet scouting for Ohio State quarterbacks. Like, oh, CJ Stroud can't be good because they've had a string of bad. It's
because
just like, all right, that's lazy.
Dwayne Haskins wasn't good, or it's like, okay, they're different people. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, they're different players. And the other thing is Ryan, you and I have been high on Riley Leonard from the first times you saw them. You told me to watch him. I then watched him and it's like, okay, this kid can ball. We didn't have to talk ourselves into Sam Hartman's fit. Also, to me, I'm even more confident in Riley Leonard's ability to transition now than I was when Riley Leonard first committed. The reason why is I think Jared Parker wanted to run an offense that would have fit Riley Leonard. I know that Mike Denbrock does because I've seen him do it at 3 schools. This isn't just like look what they did with Jaden Daniels. No, they did it with Jaden Daniels. They did it with Desmond Ritter, and they did it with Deshaun Kaiser, and he did it with Ever Golson, and he did it with Malik Zaire. I've seen him do it plenty of times. That's who he is. And I think that Riley Leonard benefited greatly. Will Howard and Riley Leonard both benefited greatly from OC changes at the schools after they committed, in my opinion. And for Notre Dame especially, I think the move from Park, and this is no disrespect to Parker, because again, I think Parker wanted to do certain things that would have fit Riley Leonard. That's why they went after Riley Leonard and Deuce Knight, right? But we didn't actually see it. It was theory. It's what we were told. With Mike Denbrock, why do I believe what I believe? Why does Ryan believe what he believes? Because we watch film and we've seen it for years, and that's why I'm excited about it. I am. Speaking of, this one kind of relates to that.
Luke Breeding says, how much 21 and 22 personnel do you expect to see this year?
Very little 22. I do think we'll see some 21. I don't know how much of it, but I do think we'll see some 21. But Mike Denbrock's going to use a lot more 11 personnel than he has in the past. But I also think he's going to use 12 personnel more than he did at LSU. He actually used a decent amount of 12 personnel at Cincinnati, Ryan, with Leonard Taylor and Josh Wiley.
Two good tight ends.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't have that at LSU. So they were a heavy 11 personnel team this year. I think it'll be a happy medium between what Notre Dame has been with 12 personnel and what LSU was with 12 personnel. I think Notre Dame now with Mike Denbrock's going to be kind of right in the middle because Mike Denbrock's not an idiot. He's going to look at Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridan and Cooper Flanagan and saying, those are three really good football players. I got to find ways to use all of them beyond just rotate one guy, three guys for one spot. So I think we'll see more of that. Same thing at running back. Because at LSU, all of his running backs were just kind of pure running backs. He didn't have a Jeremiah Love type that he could kind of use in a different way. And so I think he'll take advantage of that. Are they going to run 12 snaps of 21 personnel a game? No, I don't. Do I think they'll use 21 personnel to kind of throw teams off? And yeah, I do. Same thing with 12 personnel. But one of the big differences, as I said before, is we're going to see a lot more 11 personnel than we've seen in the past. And I also know that because that's what he did in Notre Dame. They ran a ton of 11 personnel. They were like 80-something% 11 personnel at Notre Dame the last time Mike Denbrock was here.
I dig it.
Yeah. Especially if you know how to use it. Right? I mean, that's the thing, Ryan, is you got to know how to use it. And he's done a pretty good job of that.
Orchard452 says PJ Fleck is a name that's been floated for the UCLA job. Would you leave Minnesota for UCLA given their current situations? My impulse is no, although I think Minnesota is a very, you have an easy ceiling on a Minnesota job. I just don't think that Minnesota is ever going to be like a perennial 10-win team. I just don't ever see that. I just wouldn't leave what he's built as far as stability for what UCLA is going to have short term. I just don't know if that would be a good decision, personally.
I think the only thing I would say, Ryan, I wouldn't care to live in either state. So it's not like it's a, I've always been kind of anti-California, but I wouldn't necessarily want to live in Minnesota either. But the one thing I would have to think about, because I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, is the expectations at UCLA are going to be somewhat lower because of what you said. They have to know that he's inheriting a bad roster. It's just part of the reason they want Chip Kelly out. So there'll be a little bit of patience, but I don't know that that's the move. I think PJ Fleck is more style than he is substance. I think he's the opposite of Chip Kelly. I think Chip Kelly is a lot of substance, but not no style to speak of as far as how he portrays himself. And I think he's just, I'm coaching football, right? PJ is all about the row the boat and the persona and sprinting across the field, and the substance isn't as good. Right. And so, PJ Fleck, it's a lot of it to me is an act, and that'd be perfect to be in Los Angeles. You know what I mean? So, he knows the Big Ten too. I don't know. I don't think either of them are necessarily phenomenal jobs, but to me, I'd probably want the UCLA job over the Minnesota job. If it was up to me, I just don't know that PJ Fleck could succeed at UCLA. I don't know that he's a good enough coach to win there. Because I do think you got to be a pretty good football coach to win at UCLA, because you're not going to get the same support you're going to get at other places. You got to be a pretty darn good football coach. Yeah. So for UCLA, I wouldn't make the move. For PJ Fleck, I would.
Yeah, I mean, PJ is also just I was looking it up, and he's a Midwest guy. I mean, he grew up in Illinois, he coached at Western Michigan, he coached at Rutgers. I know that's not Midwest, but still north.
But I mean, it's a lot closer than going from Minnesota to California. I think the only time he's been out of the north, he's a northern guy. How about that? He's a northern guy.
He went to Tampa Bay.
Right, with the Buccaneers. That's it.
Yep.
But that was with Schiano, wasn't it? Or no?
I'm not sure about that. I can look it up. I'm not sure.
I'm probably wrong on that, because actually, now I think about it, he was already. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at that. But anyway, the point is,
you might be right. Yeah,
I don't know how. Yeah, but I think his personality would fit somewhat out there. I just don't think he's that good of a football coach, and I've been banging that drum for a long time. I could be wrong, but I've been banging it ever since Notre Dame fans started talking about, what about PJ Fleck? Oh, no, thank you. All right, last two, Ryan, and then we're going to be done. Let's get to this one from Archer. I'm going to ask this one, Ryan, because this is for you. Archer452 says, Ryan, DeMeco Ryans missed out on the Coach of the Year by 1 vote. Do you think he deserved it over Kevin Stefanski?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, I think DeMeco did more with a questionable roster coming in than what Stefanski did. I mean, Cleveland actually has a pretty good roster overall. I mean, there's a reason that they've had a couple good years in the last few, right? I mean, like they have, I know Deshaun Watson, got hurt and it's been a little bit of a disaster, but you still have a good offensive line. You still have a pretty good defense. I mean, like it's not a bad roster. And I think also the the AFC North outside of Baltimore, you had a year where, it's a little bit down with a couple
Oh,
of the
Joe
squads,
Burrow.
right? So,
Right.
yeah, no Joe Burrow. And then, Pittsburgh's been down for a couple years. Like, they just haven't been quite as good as they have been. I mean, they're still not a bad team, but they're a scrappy team, like to just put it nicely. I think D'Amico, I mean, like I expected Houston to maybe go like 5-12, 6-11, like something like that. And the fact that you took him to a playoffs in year one, I think that was probably slightly more deserving. I do think Kevin Stefanski did a pretty good job when you consider you lost to Deshaun Watson. You ended up having to, dust Joe Burrow's carcass off of a dumpster there, right? Like that was pretty impressive. But overall, I would say that I probably would have voted for D'Amico, in my opinion.
Do you think that a lot of this just has to do with the fact that the whole storyline of winning without Deshaun and all that kind of stuff, and then
Yeah, part
bouncing
of it.
back from a rough start and all? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Joe Flacco won the comeback player of the year, and it's just like it's a
I
story,
I
right? Like,
loved his answer to that. I loved his answer to whether or not he should have won the comeback player of the year. Did you see that interview?
no, no,
So they asked him if he should be he goes, "What did I come back from?" He goes, I came back from not being on a team for a couple
right,
months." He's like he
right,
started talking about like DeMar Hamlin, he had to come back from something. You know what I mean? Like he's
right.
like, "What
He almost
exactly did
died
I
on a
come back
football
from?"
field.
Exactly.
Right,
And I
right.
thought it was a great answer. And he was being totally genuine with it. He's like, "I didn't come back from anything. I just wasn't on a team." You know what I mean?
Sure.
He's talking about like, these guys, it's more so like guys that you had to come back from an injury or these other things. And there's just a whole lot of different aspects of it. It was just a great answer. It's just like, what am I coming back from? Like, no,
Houston
DeMar
also
Hamlin had to come back from something. That
right.
was legit.
Houston also smacked Cleveland in the playoffs. Maybe it was a little bit of, oh, yeah, they smacked them, so we'll give something to Stefanski for this one. So
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Ryan. Actually, that's going to do it because we have Ivy Nation Sports Talk is going to be starting here in about 3 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and wrap
Okay.
this up and let those guys get going here at 5. They're going to be doing a rapid fire tonight, so you definitely want to join that. So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and take us out of here, man?
All right, folks, appreciate it. Make sure before you leave, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell on YouTube. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, make sure to leave a 5-star review and make sure that you're subscribed over there as well. You can go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. We have a lot of team and recruiting intel and pieces that are coming out. You can also check out the free stuff at irishbreakdown.com. That's Brian Driscoll. I'm Ryan Roberts. So we appreciate you all for the continued support, and we'll check you guys next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.
RTCF tomorrow. Be on the lookout.